Somewhere in the castle, a fierce clash erupted. Blades clanged in relentless exchange, a fight between a hero and a demoness. Both of them were baffled by what was happening. For the hero, everything was sheer wonder, and for the demoness, it was a source of surprise that made her unwilling to accept it. Neither of them could understand why their weapons stubbornly refused to break each other. Each was sincerely convinced his weapon was the most powerful. They both took a step back, and each, the same question spun in their minds. They seemed to already know the answer, yet still had to say it aloud. It was the same for both. Who forged your sword? And as their eyes glanced over the weapon's pommel, they noticed a mark. Silence fell in carved. The demonist arrived. Finally, everything fell into place. It was the work of a stubborn blacksmith, and the hero finally understood this. He quietly exhaled as soon as he reached that very conclusion. From the flow of their battle. In the fight, the hero realized the forces were equal, so continuing to clash with the same weapons was pointless. The demonist came to the same conclusion. There was no sense in prolonging the clash, and at that moment a rare agreement fell for a moment. For their generation, the truce became the only reasonable choice. The quiet irony was that they simply did not want to provoke the blacksmith who stood behind these blades. The demonists decided the blacksmith could already foresee such a turn, so underestimating him was a mistake. The hero agreed with this thought, and on that they parted ways. Everything began and spun around one figure, the legendary blacksmith. But even before these events, the very same man once died. Everything started that day when he stubbornly stepped forward to save a cat from a truck rolling straight at him. In the previous life, this step was the finale he left, moved only by love for cats. When he opened his eyes, he immediately understood. He was not lying down, he was flying, suspended in the air. Nearby, a voice was heard. Are you not sleeping? Idzo woke up and felt as if nothing had happened to his soul. He asked who she was, and the girl answered simply, in that world he died. Iso remembered how he once saved a cat. When he looked at his own hand, he realized he was dead and awkwardly wondered why he felt such a strange, calm silence inside. The girl said that under normal circumstances his soul would have been. He was supposed to be dismantled and preserved as a new resource. But she stopped this process. She slowed his spirit so that the shock would not shatter the soul. She saw how before death he saved a stray cat, and Iso acknowledged this. Then she confessed. That cat was actually her, and this realization caught him by surprise. The Guardian, she called herself a watchwoman, one who crosses between worlds and carefully watches, so that they do not harm each other. In his world, she transformed into a cat to watch. She admitted that she messed up and almost died, but Iso saved her just in time. Iso pondered, it sounds like she holds a high position, but can a truck hit really kill her? The girl clarified, only her temporary body will die. So it would be only a temporary loss, without any real impact on the world itself. But later she explained, now a violation occurred. Iso died when he shouldn't have. To fix everything, they decided she would compensate him by giving another life. Iso admitted he didn't fully understand how it works and thought, wouldn't it be easier just to erase that accident than go through such complexity? The girl explained, that would indeed be the simplest solution, but the problem is she already saw how everything happened. What she noticed will be recorded, and you can't just brush that off. She apologized and firmly said that Iso's death cannot be rolled back. Iso finally came to his senses. There was nothing more she could do. Then the girl quietly said that this had already happened in another world. She decided to swap their existences, to transfer another being into Iso's world and Iso into theirs. He was struck by the very thought. He could no longer not ask himself whether this meant living as another person, and she confirmed that he understood everything. Iso insisted on one last question. Why did she so persistently save him? The girl admitted she was mistaken, and Iso saved her so it would be unbearable for her if he really disappeared. After that, she explained, another reason turned out to exist. To prove her sincerity, or rather, gratitude, she decided to give him a cheat for the world where he would be sent. And Iso could not get the thought of that cheat out of his mind. The girl explained that he would be given something like special knowledge or skills, something that would make life in that world much easier. And she also promised to arrange a home for him. After that, she asked what he imagined his ideal life to be like. Iso pondered the past. He lived without family, completely alone, spending days working as a programmer in a company that resembled a sweatshop, and did not even notice how he had aged. His hair had turned gray. Only one person could notice that he was absent, the boss. And even then, they would quickly find a replacement for him. When his thoughts finally moved, he felt nothing else held him here anymore. But he was not going to disappear just like that, as if a second chance had appeared. It makes sense. He decided that it would be wonderful to earn money by creating things. It had been his hobby all his life. The girl instantly agreed and confidently stated that it could be arranged. Iso added, Although everything happened by chance, he loves cats so much that he would risk his life to save them. If it were possible, he would want to live slowly and peacefully surrounded by cats. And then the girl asked what exactly he wanted to create. He fell silent and suddenly realized. His whole life had drawn him to sports smithing, but he never had the chance to try. She also agreed to this and she invested in him the experience and skills of a blacksmith, added language knowledge, a general understanding of the world, some combat skills, and just a little magical power. A sudden flash of light covered ISO, and in the next moment he was thrown down. He woke up in the middle of the forest. He slowly sat up and pain spread throughout his body, and his head seemed to be bursting from a pounding pulse. As soon as it happened, something strange suddenly stirred in his head. Iso could not understand what was happening to him, in his head, in his body, and even in the tips of his fingers, when a stream of unfamiliar information suddenly overwhelmed him without warning. Suddenly it became clear. At this very moment, everything finally fell into place. His old life was completely cut off. He felt everything was finally coming together. To check himself, he opened his palm and clenched it into a fist. The body seemed to have been reassembled. Suddenly it was filled to the brim with foreign knowledge and experiences that initially should not have existed. Because of this, it felt eerily and strangely cold inside, as if something extra was squeezed into him, not his, not needed, and it pressed against his very essence. Hearing footsteps, he immediately noticed a house nearby. He remembered the girl said she had prepared something for him, so he approached and opened the door. Opening the door, he rushed inside. He looked around and immediately spotted the kitchen. The kitchen, bedroom, ingredients, and various tools, everything needed for daily life was laid out in place, so he decided these supplies would last at least for some time. But there was no electricity, no running water either, and accordingly no well was found, and he immediately understood. He needed to find a water source. A source. After that, he noticed another room nearby. When he entered inside, he froze in surprise. Before him was a workspace, and all the materials and tools were already waiting for him, ready at hand. He took a hammer. His hands and fingers moved so naturally, as if they themselves knew when and how to engage. The realization hit him instantly and unmistakably. I know this. Finally, everything fell into place, the very thing called cheat along. He knew how to cast a little spell, and hunger stealthily crept up. By the light, it seemed to him as if it were already noon. So he decided to prepare something for lunch, and after the meal, he planned to go outside and look for a water source. Of course, he began preparing the ingredients in the kitchen and lit a fire, not taking his eyes off his own hand. With strange surprise, he noticed his hand was capable of producing a small flame. But this was not enough for a long burn, nor to heat up to a high temperature, but it was quite enough to ignite. As soon as everything quieted down, he got ready to go outside and set off in search of water. Wandering through the forest, he suddenly spotted a green squirrel. This world brightly suggested he was no longer in his native dimension. He wondered what this forest might be like and how vast it was. Whether there were cities or villages nearby, he did not know. He had been told almost nothing about such things. In the end, he had to honestly admit, apart from his own abilities, he knew almost nothing about this world. Step by step, he reached some grass and immediately recognized it medicinal. He was struck by an understanding. This was from the basic knowledge that had been instilled in him. So despite his surprise, he picked a few such plants. At the same time, he felt both his mind and body slowly getting used to the world, which was new to him. Then he moved on and glanced at how much was left to the house. It turned out that it would take about 15 minutes on foot to get to the house, a good daily warm-up. Soon he came across a source of fresh water. As soon as he looked at his own reflection, he was suddenly struck. His appearance had changed. Everything changed. The girl made him a little younger exactly as he asked, so now he looked about 30 years old. He saw a fish in the water and immediately understood. Fishing could also be an option. Soon a rustle sounded nearby. He listened carefully, sinking into thoughts. What could it be? Because he felt something was lying there. When he approached closer to check, he saw a woman lying unconscious. He stepped even closer and carefully examined her condition. He saw that she was bleeding, and turning her off stopped the flow. Looking closely, he saw a tail and still could not figure out who she was. A human, a tiger, or some kind of beast human. He felt if he did not immediately take her to his home, she would not survive. So he carried her just as he. As soon as this happened, her body convulsed with pain, but he did not stop. Wasting time was not an option. Returning home, Iso searched for sewing tools, but in the end only fabric remained. He tore off several scraps, fashioned bandages, and boiled water to sterilize the needle. Iso carefully laid the woman on the bed and began examining her wounds. As expected, the most serious wound was on her abdomen. Thanks to his knowledge, he knew exactly what to do. Endure the setup, and it really proved useful. He took the sterilized needle and thread and sewed the wound properly. While he worked, the woman suddenly shuddered from pain, but he did not rush. He carefully finished everything. When he finished, he fed her herbs. And then it seemed her condition finally stabilized. With relief, he thought that he had managed to provide first aid even if he was just an amateur. He realized if the wound left a scar, he would have to accept it and feel guilty for a long time. Iso pondered how to disinfect the wound and reduce the fever, then smiled with relief. The herbs he had gathered earlier turned out to be useful. He paid the price. Fatigue quickly caught up, and he understood. From now on, this is the world he must live in. He thought about how to prepare for the life of a blacksmith. There were still many tasks, but this was his second chance, so he leaned toward a slower and calmer rhythm without daily exhausting work and without returning to it. He decided it was better to start work the next day, occasionally glancing to see how she was. He knew that falling asleep was a bad idea, but fatigue broke him anyway. He carefully lowered his head onto the bed and fell asleep in a moment. Time passed and the woman was again above him. For him, this became the beginning of a new chapter in life. The tigress suddenly grabbed him by the neck and Iso immediately felt there was not a drop of real strength in her grip. As it turned out, she had no intention of killing him at all. He carefully examined the wound on her stomach. Her mood swung from side to side while he remained calm, unshaken. She made it clear it still hurt, although the wound was already healing. A call that brought him relief. Later she noticed. Did he see her body? Iso realized. There was no other choice. He had to examine it to treat her properly and prove by his actions that he had done nothing unnecessary. She leaned in, absorbed his scent, then sharply pulled back, deciding for now to trust him. He did not feel any hint of lying from him. Iso stood confused. He did not fully understand, and she related it to the heartbeat. It shows what state you are in. He exhaled with relief. Everything was fine, and the situation did not cross the boundary of awkwardness. He handed her several things and insisted, get dressed. He explained that the previous clothes were soaked in blood, so they had to be cut during treatment. Iso hesitated whether he meant anything to her, so he quietly apologized and suddenly realized that he might have misunderstood. He really is important to her. She did not worry. For her, these were just old, worn-out racks. She looked around and asked if it was his. He confirmed immediately as soon as she asked what he was doing here. Iso briefly thought of calling himself a blacksmith. Although, to be honest, he had settled there only the day before. She looked at him carefully and did not feel any lie. Yet she noticed she does not remember any house in this part of the forest. Iso explained that the house had already stood here before his arrival. She fell silent and said, from this side of the Black Forest you rarely come. You might not have noticed. But the mention of the Black Forest stirred a faint feeling of familiarity in him. And here, judging by the available data, it suddenly became clear to him. This area lies east of the forest. At first she said that this usually happens in the north or west, but yesterday, resting here, she came across a large black bear. Since then everything spun and unfolded exactly as it happened. Eventually she realized, if Iso had not found her, this creature would have simply killed her. Hearing about that dangerous creature in the forest, Iso shuddered with fear. He felt he was really lucky yesterday he did not come across it, and immediately thought about how long it would take for her wounds to fully heal. He concluded, the beast people have bodies much stronger than human ones, but in her current state hunting or scouting would have to be forgotten at least for 2 weeks. Iso pondered what if this idea could live at his home. His proposal hit her right on target. He had just arrived, and was already talking about finding someone to help with the household and the smithy. Instead, he promises her shelter and food until she recovers, and that really sounds honest. She hesitated for a moment, as if she did not immediately catch the meaning. Pausing his thoughts for a moment, he weighed everything properly and finally agreed. He did not look suspicious at all, so she decided to stay until the wounds healed and she could move normally again. Again, what would come next could be decided later, and Iso, feeling there was no point in rushing, agreed. It did not matter. She smiled faintly, accepting this thought, for now she was under his care. Then he asked her name. Time passed and she suddenly realized her name was Samia. To him, this name sounded wonderful, but to her not at all. She considered it weak, without charm, and wanted something louder. Iso equated it to something like Gonzalez. She laughed at that, so strange and so unexpected. This noticeably, though slightly, irritated Iso. Yet still he sincerely believed. A name given by family naturally suits the one who bears it. This pleased her. For a moment her mood lightened, and it was then that Iso said his name, Iso Tanya. And as soon as he realized it, everything fell into place. People like him with the same features most often come from the northern regions of this world. Somia blinked in confusion. Surnames were extremely rare here. Such names usually hinted either at status or land ownership, so starting this picture with Smithy would be completely inappropriate. But Iso felt it would be better if she simply accepted everything as it is. He wanted her to call him only by his first name, and she agreed. After some time, Iso was finally ready to get to work. In his opinion, there was enough preparation, so he decided to start by making a small knife. First, he lit a fire in the hearths. Then he maintained the heat until the coals burned properly. Using wind magic, he controlled. He adjusted the airflow so that the ventilation remained steady as if tuning bellows. The fire did not flare up, so he confidently managed on his own. But the heat stubbornly proved stronger than he thought. As soon as the temperature passed 800 degrees Celsius, the steel began to change color, a sign that it was ready to be forged. Izo knew well the process with the theory he was given, but in practice he was doing it for the first time. This, thanks to the cheat, he immediately understood when the iron. He had already reached the desired state, yet he still felt out of place. He himself was in shock and could not comprehend. Is this really his ability? The power in every hammer strike felt foreign. He remembered earlier how he carried some Mia home and ran for water. Even in his 30s, he never had such strength. Suddenly he realized the body had become stronger. He was already about to start the afternoon work as soon as Samia had lunch and rested a bit. Reaching the last steps, he was forging iron, reheating it again and then cooling it. Then he decisively plunged the metal into water and thus hardened the blade. He filed the blade with a file and then brought it to a sharp edge, sharpening on a wet stone step by step. Step by step, Izzo relied on the knowledge invested in him and transformed it through his actions into living experience. His movements merged with the skills given to him, leading the body to true mastery, clearly reflected by the sharp shape of the blade. A certain time passed and the knife was finally ready. This creation became his first, so he pondered what to test it on and chose a bunch of vegetables. When the blade cut through them completely, he froze in amazement. It cut cleanly. Even when it was pressed with a board under the vegetables, he couldn't believe how sharp the blade was. None of the knives in the house even came close to this, and he began to doubt. Was this really the effect of that cheat? The blade, which cut through material so easily, looked almost unnatural yet dangerously effective. He decided better to take it for self-defense and at least attach a proper handle to it. Iso felt this very clearly. If you rely too much on the cheat, the knife will quickly become too sharp, and such a blade is too dangerous to sell on any market. With this, he conspired in his thoughts. The next day he would make 3 more knives, one sharper than the first, another a bit less sharp, and the last barely sharp. At first he wanted to ask Samia to test them, and only after that decide what to do next. She was still sleeping until Iso gently woke her and whispered, "Dinner is ready." She stirred, sighed, and said as if to herself, "No matter how much I rest, it's still not enough." Iso looked at her carefully and noticed the wounds still need care, so she shouldn't move too much to regain strength. Noticing the object in his hand, she wondered, maybe it's some kind of magic. Magic, although for him it was something very simple. He handed her the dish. He knew that rest was important, and he knew one more thing: real food was just as necessary. She took it without hesitation. The dish boiled down to stewed meat and vegetables. Iso was not particularly skilled in cooking, and this was the maximum he could manage at all. Even in this new world, he clearly felt, without money you can't buy food, firewood, or materials for blacksmithing. The next day the knives were Finally everything was ready. He called Samkia. She agreed to pass it to the system. She herself did not know if she could help with forging, but Iso asked only one thing to check how the knives cut, and pointed to the first one for her to try. She took the knife and began cutting vegetables. As soon as the blade passed through, she was immediately overwhelmed by a feeling of precision. Then Iso ordered her to take the next knife, and she continued the work without hesitation. And she handled it the same way, again cutting cleanly, and she was even more surprised. From behind she noticed that the second knife made cutting easier, and this difference threw her off balance. He became alert. The blade seemed to enter too easily. Then he lifted her hand and brought it to the last knife. Let her try, the one he considered the most important. She gathered herself and made the cuts. She was undoubtedly shaken by how everything turned out, easily without any resistance. Iso then made her try to pull it out. Samia froze in confusion, not immediately realizing what had happened, and Iso instantly asked her to calm down. He already understood everything. Holding a knife in such a state was dangerous. She apologized. Iso waved his hand as if dismissing the blame. He also hadn't interpreted everything correctly beforehand, and this only confirmed his own thoughts. The cheat he was given elevated him to the level of a first-class blacksmith, and he began to think, if he wants to sell his work, he will have to carefully consider how to present and package it. Samia immediately became interested in the knife. Her eyes even lit up. For hunting, and Iso saw nothing wrong with this and would gladly give it to her. She reacted instantly and extraordinarily brightly. It was clear she liked the idea, but Iso did not. He did not make a tragedy out of it. The shorter version was enough anyway, but he was going to make a sheath for the knife that would take some time. When everything was settled, she returned to bed and continued to rest. Since then, a clear plan had formed in Iso what to do next. After slightly refining the quality, he could produce more knives, ones suitable for sale, and from his reactions it was clear. He definitely felt what level would be achieved. The first step to make even more knives and household tools, and then sell them to support himself. He had heard that beyond the forest there was a town where a lively market bustled on weekends. And from this, his blacksmith life ignited in his heart. After bandaging the wound, Samia glowed with gratitude. Iso took a liking to her and asked, and she replied that she was not yet ready for hunting but already felt much better than before. Then Iso suggested to set off for the city that day. A week had already passed since he started making knives, so he even managed to craft several other tools. As soon as they had gathered enough items, they set off to sell them. He needed a standard version of his knife, model number 1. It could be mass-produced because it was quick and easy to make. By that time, Samia had almost completely recovered. They even started going for walks together, and during each one, she shared knowledge about the forest and its ecology with a smile. Iso combined all this with what he was given, so gradually he began to better understand what was happening around him. He was afraid of encountering dangerous beasts, wolves, or wild boars, but nothing scary appeared. Sumiya believed the reason was that Iso radiated a too strong presence that repelled threats. But Iso still found it hard to fully accept this. After all, she was stronger. In his thoughts, he felt it. Even without realizing the limits of his own strength, he knew there were definitely creatures in the forest far more dangerous than him. The road lasted almost 2 hours on foot through the forest until he reached the main road, and then another hour from there to get to the town. Probably luck was their ally. No one blocked the way, neither dangerous creatures nor bandits. After that, Samia nodded forward and pointed to the town emerging ahead. Behind the walls, a bazaar spread out. That was exactly where they were heading, to the market. Iso was burning with the idea of opening a small business outside the city walls. He realized it is worth settling here and no longer having to worry about entrance or exit holes. As soon as they approached, a man nearby called out to them. They turned around and saw a guard. He stepped closer and began the interrogation. Iso answered calmly and collectedly, as he had gained experience over the years, communicating with people. The guard noticed that he had not seen them here before and sharply asked what their purpose was. Iso introduced himself as a blacksmith who was going to sell knives at the market. Then the guard asked to inspect one. Iso agreed immediately, without any hesitation. Hesitation is only a moment, and then a thorough, careful inspection of the blade. It was already dusk, so the guard did not notice anything suspicious. Iso and Samia moved on, but the guard warned once more, "Don't get into trouble." As soon as they entered the market, they paid a silver coin and received a stall with permission to trade. Places were distributed on a first-come, first-served basis. As they walked through the market, Iso noticed all the good spots were already taken, so Samia waved to another corner and suggested trying there. After Iso set everything up, he felt, finally, every item was in its place. This place turned out to be quite decent, and Sumiya immediately noticed it. That day, Iso touched her, and she responded with a gentle smile. 2 hours had already passed, and they still hadn't sold anything. Iso persistently called people and even showed the goods, but it was all in vain. He honestly admitted in his thoughts, programmer experience hadn't taught him to sell. A familiar voice broke the silence and asked how things were. It was the guard. Iso had already come to terms with defeat earlier, so he looked with a smile at the humor of his own inability to sell anything, but suddenly the guard became interested in buying a knife. It caught Iso by surprise. The guard said that those knives had really impressed him once, and since his own had broken, he asked for a replacement. Iso accepted everything and handed him the knife. The guard examined the item, squinted with satisfaction, and asked about the price. Iso answered, 5 silver coins. The guard grimaced in surprise and inquired if that was really the correct price. Iso had already discussed the price with Samia, and they understood. If it was set too high, it could lead to trouble. The guard handed over 5 silver coins, and Iso sincerely thanked him. For the first time in his life, he earned money from something he created with his own hands. Before leaving, the guard cast one more glance. If the blade proved itself well, he would recommend it to his colleagues. Iso was confident in the quality of his work. The guard stepped back. Samia looked at him and wondered if he was truly satisfied. Iso replied with quiet pride for what he had done. Another hour passed, 3 in total, and there were still no new buyers. I began to think that maybe people there didn't need household tools at all. He decided it was time to pack up and go home, and just as they were about to leave, a voice sounded. "Are you closing already?" When they turned around. Turning around, they saw a squad of guards approaching them. Iso was even surprised they hadn't caused any problems. The senior guard stepped forward and sharply asked if it was true that this was Iso's stall, and if he was the one who sold a knife to a guard named Marius. Iso tried to explain everything. Probably it was that younger guard they had seen earlier, and it seemed like the whole story added up. The senior guard. Underguard's eyes flashed. He asked if there were any knives left. Iso, although not expecting such a turn, displayed the remaining goods, and the guard immediately decided to buy everything without hesitation. The sudden decision knocked Iso off his feet. Other guards said that during the break Marius proudly showed his new knife, so they decided to come and see it with their own eyes. They insisted the blades must be of the same quality. Iso quickly calculated the sum for 8 knives, which came to 40 silver coins. The guards, impressed by the sharpness of the blades, immediately bought them. Later, as they were returning through the forest, Samia finally sighed with relief they managed to sell everything. Iso nodded and sincerely thanked her for the help that day. The goods sold out completely, so he already understood. He needed a little more time before he could make enough again and replenish the stock. He grew confident. Now he knew more than simple repairs and small orders. So he set a new goal to forge a long sword and thought that if he managed to negotiate with a traveling merchant, he could expand the range of his goods. It was then that Iso realized he needed to test the agricultural tools and axes he had made himself. And at that very moment he realized one more thing. Samia also needed a separate room. In the house, Samia asked with interest if he could make arrowheads, and Iso immediately understood. She wanted them for hunting as soon as she fully recovered. She liked the very feeling that she would hunt with equipment similar to what he made. Iso agreed and decided to make them for her, and Samia apparently was delighted. After some time, Iso gathered his thoughts and again took up making knives that day. After this, he was going to move on to arrowheads. At first, he molded shapes from wood and clay, and then they poured molten steel into them and did not rush, patiently waited until it cooled. He turned to Samia for help. She sharpened the blades and as soon as everything was ready, attached them to the handles. While this was happening, Iso was crafting a large saw for cutting firewood, and again set about reworking the axe he had previously tried to sell. In a cramped chamber, he carved teeth for patients who needed a saw, and this work kept him in the workshop all day. The next day, Iso went outside and froze, standing facing the tree. He raised the axe and swung it broadly. One strong blow, and to his surprise, the blade hit. Surprisingly, the tree even creaked. And with one strike, half of it collapsed and he and Samia stood frozen in confusion. When Iso looked at the axe in his hand, he could no longer help but think about its power. If he was not careful, the new life could end as quickly as the previous one. Next, they took on the fallen tree. They chopped it into smaller pieces with the axe. Iso shouted to Samia insistently again and again, "Don't do anything." He asked her not to overexert herself. She had not fully recovered yet. So they continued working side by side, then took a large saw and dragged it back and forth, cutting the wood. But as soon as they started working, Iso suddenly felt surprised. The resistance was too soft, as if he was cutting something completely different than expected and much easier. Samia also realized something strange. She even smiled. It seemed funny to her. Iso warned her to be careful because the tension made the body tremble. When they finished, Iso smiled. Everything went smoothly. And at that pace, he was sure they would finish everything by the end of the day. Samia noticed. Such work usually takes longer, but with Iso's tools, everything accelerated incredibly fast. She couldn't tear herself away from his fantastic equipment. Iso realized the skill to create such tools came to him along with the knowledge embedded in them, like a cheat received in a second life. But he did not intend to rely only on this bonus. He wanted to grow by his own efforts and at the same time remain grateful for the chance to start with such gifts. In his thoughts, he always felt himself here a guest. So he finally decided to truly use his abilities, to live a calm life and never again abuse the power given to him. That night, Samia noticed Iso was still working. She approached him and immediately caught his attention. Her thoughts again covered everything he had just confessed. Earlier, he already said that he did not live here at first. Iso admitted this earlier, and now she wondered, maybe he plans to stay here further. Go ahead, it seems he has already decided everything, and she again and again replayed in her mind the events from the moment she arrived here. Even despite the injury that limited her abilities, she still found joy in helping him. At the table, the conversations were lively and fascinating, and the walks together were exactly what she awaited with impatience. She was most drawn to watching how he worked, seeing the concentration with which he created with his own hands, and she definitely took this into account. She suddenly froze in thought. Would it be okay if they continued living together? The weather, Iso had already decided to stay in this place, and with that decision another question arose. Would she be comfortable here? Her reaction said it all by itself. She was more than ready, admiration shown through every word of her gratitude. Then Iso finished the night work and handed her the arrowhead she had asked for. Gradually Iso began carving. He tried to fit into this world. With every small choice today and beyond, he outlined the life he intended to build, and hoped that this would be the beginning of many calm and pleasant moments ahead. Meanwhile, in the bar of some city, a man was happily telling that he bought a knife from Iso. Iso, his friend, stood nearby, watching where Iso went, and estimated when he would return and only then planned to get the same one next time. At that time, very close by, a woman overheard their conversation. Interested, she stepped forward and approached them and asked to see the knife they were talking about. Iso handed Samia a lunchbox full of bread and dried meat and anxiously reminded her. She had just recovered, so at the slightest danger she must return immediately. She understood and moved forward. Iso watched her with his eyes, wishing her safety with all his heart. After that, Iso plunged back into work. First of all, he intended to replenish his inventory. Since then, he decided not to limit himself to knives. He took up forging long swords. First, he inspected the mold he had made earlier and checked if it had dried properly. When he was convinced, he cut the mold in half and took out the core from inside. Then he again joined the two outer halves, placed them in a barrel of sand, and poured molten iron inside. When the metal cooled, he removed the clay and pulled out the sword, after which he ground down the rough edges and hammered them, smoothing the contours. After that, while the blade was still hot, he finally shaped it, bringing the form to the desired one. When the metal became soft and manageable after annealing, he sharply sharpened the blade, installed the guard, and wrapped the handle with leather, and then, despite the simplicity, crafted a wooden sheath to complete the piece. Usually such work was done by several people in turn, so here he managed on his own with a cheat given to him by the watch cat Iso in his workshop. He completed the main part of the creation quickly and carefully, engraving his signature mark on the sword pommel. A moment more and just with the last stroke, the work was finally ready. He took the design from the image of a cute cat he once saw on social networks, so the first stage of his long sword was already behind. For several days in a row, he prepared to release simpler models of swords and knives in large batches of lower rank. And even though these were his own creations, he did not overlook the details, carefully polishing every part. Suddenly, Iso found himself with the sword in his hands and froze in a combat pose like a true hero from an epic. As soon as Samia returned home, she immediately saw him, and Iso involuntarily became a little embarrassed. He did not explain anything, only nodded and with his gaze made it clear as if to say she has already returned. Cheeks in Samia barely flushed, and Iso immediately noticed it. On her face, joy barely flickered. Iso suddenly realized, when someone is waiting at home, it's a completely different comfort, and Samia felt the same. It was happiness, something Iso did not know in his previous life. Then he asked about her walk, and Samia confirmed. She successfully hunted a tree deer. She had already prepared everything, took out the entrails, and threw them into the lake, so that in the morning they could retrieve the prey. Iso understood everything, then shifted his gaze and evaluated how exactly the knife and arrows worked. Armed, Samia felt on herself. This weapon was actually very effective. The next morning, she and Iso returned with the tree deer. Samia had hunted it, and immediately began to dissect the prey. They cut the carcass. Thanks to her skill with the knife and the sharpness of the blade, they removed the skin almost instantly, then immediately cut the meat into portions. As soon as all the meat was cut, but Iso immediately noticed, the sharpness of the knife made the process almost too easy. The further they went, the more the pieces of meat began to resemble what he was already used to. Iso wondered how exactly this was happening. In his previous world, the sweetness of fruits and how easy it was to eat cooked meat did not appear by themselves. All this was the result of people's work behind the scenes. While they were frying another portion of meat, Iso thought aloud, what happened to the organs cut out from the deer? Samia replied that if the remains were left in the forest, the wolves would eat them themselves. Iso perceived this as a simple return of the rest back to the forest. When he ate, the taste overwhelmed him completely. He had not felt such pleasure from fresh meat for a long time. Just a moment, and he rushed again to the next hunt. Catching a bird would be a great idea, especially since fried leafy birds were famous for their taste. Iso liked this thought. From Samia's reaction, he understood eating well is truly an important part of a slow and measured life. Later, they brought the rest of the meat into the workshop, prepared it for drying, and Iso was already planning to take on smoking very soon. The next morning, when Samia decided to take a break from hunting, Iso asked her to help him with work. She began to mold the shape and suddenly became so absorbed in the process itself. Thanks to her, Iso again managed to accumulate enough supplies to take them to the city. As soon as they arrived, Marius met them. We hadn't seen them for a long time, so the heart already pricked with anxiety. Iso explained, due to previous demand, his supplies were completely exhausted. Soon Marius noticed, this time Iso brought swords. A man nearby became interested and said that maybe he would come back later to take a closer look. Setting up his stall, Iso noticed the neighboring seller and nodded to him, as if to say today they would have to work side by side. That man took it without any problems. Iso asked Samia to use this time to buy groceries, primarily salt and barley. Finally, she agreed and went to take care of everything. And as soon as everything was ready, Iso finished setting up the stall and quietly, without haste, began trading. After some time, a man approached Iso and became interested in these varieties. Iso handed him one and the man immediately pulled it out. First, he looked at the blade itself, then pulled it out of the sheath and examined it closely. After this, the man immediately felt the blade was genuine, of high quality. Then he decided to buy 4 varieties. This confused Iso. He was already doubting whether the man was really that confident. The man stated that he was a traveling merchant. He would keep only one for himself and take the rest further to sell. Iso immediately realized what was happening here and seized the chance. A thought flashed in his mind. This way he would take his business beyond the town limits and let others sell his works in different places. When the deal was completed, Iso pondered the idea of traveling merchants. Suddenly it occurred to him, as soon as he collects enough money, it would be wonderful to go on a trip together with Samia someday. Soon Marius arrived together with several comrades. Thanks to their purchases, Iso was able to sell all his usual long shorts. Only high-class models remain, those he has not yet managed to display. When Samia returned, Iso told her that the knives had already been sold. While they were negotiating, she noticed a person nearby who kept looking around. His figure stood out sharply. A dwarf, and Samia was surprised that he had ended up in these parts. Iso for a moment and recognized the hint about dwarfs. From his knowledge, he recalled that this is a people of shorter stature. Samia decided that they were almost invisible there. Even for her, most meetings were short usually. She found them in the forest and escorted them to the main road. Soon the gnome caught both their gazes and without wasting time, rushed swiftly towards them. He stubbornly stared at Iso, trying to see if he was the one who forged the knives used by the guards. Iso did not hesitate for a moment and confirmed, yes, he was the one who forged them. The gnome noticed the knife lying on the table and his eyes flashed with curiosity. Iso allowed her to come closer and take a better look. She snatched the knife and immediately began testing it, carefully examining how it lay in her hand and what it was capable of. After that, she decided to look at the best of what he had available. In the warehouse, next to the usual mass-produced models, was this towering thing. Iso deliberately hid it to sell only to someone she deemed worthy. The gnome, sensing that there must be something even better somewhere, waited patiently with hope. Iso raised the sword and handed it to the gnome to examine. As soon as he glanced at it, she was obviously clearly surprised. Carefully wiped the blade with a piece of cloth and it shone. Although Iso was quite small, she moved confidently and precisely, as if she flawlessly knew how to handle such things. She continued to disassemble every detail, thoroughly testing the sword, while Iso and Samia just stood aside and watched without interfering. She stared, and over time it became clear she had been studying its blade for quite a while. Meanwhile, other customers came and went, and she did not take her eyes off the steel, so Iso began to wonder how much time she had left to finish everything. Finally, she returned the sword. Iso was slightly disappointed, hoped she would buy it, but still accepted it back without any problems. But instead of leaving, the gnome made an unexpected request. Iso became completely confused as soon as she asked. She stepped forward and everyone around immediately turned their gaze to her. Why, without hesitation, she knelt down and asked to become his apprentice. Her appearance on her knees completely stunned Iso. In a few moments, Iso, Samia, and the dwarf sat together. The dwarf woman introduced herself as Rika Moritz and sincerely said that she was very pleased to meet them. Before Iso could refuse, she fell flat on a crowded street. To carefully listen to her explanation, they moved to a quieter corner. Iso also did not want Samia to attract the public's attention in vain. Samia considered this name too unusual and wondered if it might turn out to be a surname. Later it turned out, Moritz is not a surname but the name of a community of blacksmiths to which she belonged. Among the dwarfs, it was customary to gather in several families and forge in a common smithy, so they called themselves by the name of that workshop. In these parts, she was known as Rika Moritz from the Moritz smithy, and Iso immediately understood this. Then Iso named his names. Among them was Samia, and now in response he warmly greeted her. It was Rika's turn. She looked intently at the man, guessed where he came from, and decided it seemed he was from the north. Iso did not argue yes, there was truth in that. Just today, due to circumstances, he was working as a blacksmith in the Black Forest. At first, Rika was struck by the thought. Why had she never seen a blacksmith of such a level before coming here, and she realized. The reason was precisely in his origin. Iso could not understand at all what exactly she meant when she suddenly wanted to make him her apprentice. According to explanations, dwarves usually leave their native forge for several years to occasionally hone their skills. Rika and her brothers also chose this path. They set out from the workshop to travel, moving from one forge to another, visiting different masters and learning until their skills became more precise. They became apprentices to experienced blacksmith masters and over time improved their craftsmanship. Then they returned to their native workshop with new knowledge and creations and again set out to where they once learned. This cycle was an integral part of dwarves' lives. Iso could not bear the doubts. Could it be that they do not care at all that their techniques might pass to others? According to Riku, it is a true honor for a forge when a dwarf becomes an apprentice to another master. His growth, knowledge, and techniques that he brings back will ultimately strengthen the forge itself. She did it herself. Riku pulled out a knife and at that moment remembered that a few days ago, just after arriving in the city, she saw this very knife in the hands of the guards. Iso recognized it was one of the blades he had forged. This connection finally confirmed everything for her. Since Iso had no dealings with city blacksmiths and sold his products only at the market, Riku ordered the brothers to go ahead, and she herself stayed to wait until he returned. Iso thought about the brothers and suddenly everything fell into place. They had already set off further to find their masters, with whom they would now study. He involuntarily wondered, what if he refuses her? It seems she simply continues the path alone, searching for a new master. He could not shake the thought of that young girl wandering alone on uncertain paths. Each time she seemed to emphasize all the risks. Nearby, Samia quietly watched Riku without a single word. That's all. Iso was tormented, noticing some naivety in this, but eventually decided to make her his apprentice. But Samia absolutely did not agree with this decision. But Iso immediately set conditions. 4 demands had to be accepted, and Riku agreed without hesitation to listen to them until the end. The first rule was simple and clear. He would not tolerate any behavior that neglected personal safety from then on. Such recklessness would have no chance to repeat. He accepted this without any resistance. The second condition was stated as follows. There were not enough rooms, so renovations would have to be done. Third, besides blacksmithing, she would also take on various household chores. The fourth was the same formal S. Ordinary words became unnecessary. He would call her Riku, and she would simply call him Aizu. It was hard for Riku to swallow this, and instead she chose to address him as her master. From the apprentice's point of view, it was natural to show proper respect to the one who taught her, and at that moment Samia laughed. Laughter was her reaction to the situation, while others experienced everything in their own way. After some time they reached the destination. Iso explained, here is both their home and the workshop. Riku involuntarily froze. She was filled with admiration for what she saw. Iso looked at her, immediately noticed. Her luggage was heavy to carry, and the forest path was not one of those that come easily. Yet Riku managed. Her strong body made the journey easier than she herself expected. He told her to put away his things and get herself in order. At the same time, he sincerely thanked Samia, acknowledging that the path through the forest was exactly what would help Riku walk more easily. Samia reluctantly agreed. Later, the 3 of them sat down to dinner. Then Iso spoke again about the place. Space was lacking, so for now Riku and Samio would have to share a bedroom. Rika hesitated. She felt that such an arrangement might be inappropriate. Moreover, since she had brought camping gear, she lost her peace of mind. She could spend the night outside and give the bedroom to others. Iso saw no problem with this. He hardly needed the bedroom, so nothing would really change for him. Riku found this strange, and he began to puzzle over how it was even possible to live together. The unsolicited assumption instantly confused Iso and Samia, who were clearly bewildered. To her words about the need to move forward, Samia decisively rejected this idea and immediately made it clear. Their relationship was not at all as they had imagined. Confirmed, Riku looked at the situation in a new way and suddenly realized that he had interpreted everything incorrectly. Meanwhile, Iso was confused by the very thought. He could not even understand how such a relationship could work in this world at all. Iso decided that enough was enough with clarifications, so explaining in his own way, he declared, there is nothing between him and Samia, at least for now. The phrase "for now" suddenly struck Samia. The guard stepped away, leaving her a little embarrassed. Iso noticed this reaction and quickly checked if everything was all right. And Riku saw the same thing differently. For him, it was a company of people living together like one family in the same workshop. The word family hung in Iso's thoughts. Holding this thought in his head, he agreed. It also lightly patted some on the head. Then he took up practical matters and said simply, "While the house is under renovation, we will sleep as previously agreed. He and the owner are responsible, so his word is final and they both agreed to this." The next day they started the renovation, sanding the prepared wood and simultaneously digging holes for the posts, because Samia went hunting and the work was left to Aizo and Riku. However, Riku was quite accustomed to this, probably from a gnome forge, and together with Aizo's enhanced strength, everything moved incredibly fast. Finally, after some time, Samia returned from hunting. Aizo greeted her on her return and asked how everything went. Samia brought down a large wooden deer. Samia's gaze slid further and she immediately noticed Riku, focused on work. Riku was sorting firewood and taking an axe, cut the wood with stunning ease as if it were much softer, and the sharpness of the blade impressed her. Moment by moment, Samia recognized this reaction. It came to her mind how she herself first felt this, just saw it, and then it seemed a bit strange to her. Aizo listened and was slightly surprised. Samia had described it like this before, but he did not dwell on it and explained that the blacksmith work would start the next day and would also proceed alongside the ongoing repairs. Riku was frankly fired up by this plan. By sunset, they managed to prepare a mold for a less powerful type of blade, advancing step by step. The next morning, the three returned with the prey that Samia had hunted and immediately began to disassemble it. After a short pause, they resumed the blacksmith work. The molten metal was poured into the mold prepared the day before. As expected, Riku quickly adapted. Gaining experience right during the work, her hands moved without hesitation and the pace was simultaneously effective and enduring. After a light lunch break during the day, they resumed work, fully focused on making knives. But there was only one single problem. The techniques that Aizo used were based on a cheat sheet he took out. Teaching such was extremely difficult. Riku loudly said this, addressing Aizo directly. In front of him, Aizo did not try to evade, he blurted out the truth. He was taking a student for the first time and did not know exactly how to teach him. Riku understood this immediately. She herself instantly understood everything and agreed to learn. She observed, fully focused, not taking her eyes off for a second, and decided not to miss a single, even minor movement. At first, they took on the knife, which they were to produce en masse, simple for everyday use. When Aizo forged the metal, it came alive in action. Riku watched attentively, studying every movement. When the blade was heated and plunged into water, it hissed sharply. Aizo explained. Only sharpening and polishing the edge to a shine remained. Then he looked at Riku and asked with interest if she had noticed anything while watching him. Riku carefully studied her own sensations and had already noticed several things. She realized that Aizo seemed to be able to determine the state of the iron just by the sound. Yet he did not give all of his strength. She also noticed that long sword he had demonstrated earlier was in no way similar to the knife he was forging now. Aizo explained, "This is a knife for everyday use and he wants her to learn to make something similar, so she should watch the process carefully before taking on the work herself." After this, he asked her to try making one. Rick began the process with iron precision. Aizo watched and could not believe his own eyes. She worked so skillfully, although she had seen him at work only once. After some time, Rick finished her end. He took the knife and handed it to her so she could examine it. She took the knife and carefully inspected the result. Aizo quietly thought, the work before him was impressive. It was not at all inferior to the usual model he had made earlier. Aizo noticed, although Rick did well, there were moments when sparks flew too strongly, and this clearly showed there was still room to grow. But despite everything, he was confident. Over time, she would be able to forge something on the level of that long sword she had seen earlier. These words ignited enthusiasm in Rick, and she decided to fully devote herself to improving her skills. Aizo wanted to show everything again visually, this time every step from start to finish, so she could see everything clearly. Obviously, when you watch someone take the iron in their hands for the first time, at some point something suddenly clicks in the head. Thanks to the cheat he had, he instinctively knew how to handle the metal, when to take a step, where to strike, what temperature and hardness were needed, and all this came naturally. So he could forge precisely, without hesitation, straight from thought, without losing quality. And he felt it just as clearly. This ability is born neither from effort nor from training. Riku and other craftsmen relied only on their own abilities. From the very beginning, they forged mastery through apprenticeship and relentless practice, step by step gaining experience. Aizo felt audacity in this, to take on teaching what one has never truly grasped in the traditional way. So he decided to simply let her observe, learn, and draw out everything she was capable of. Riku patiently waited while he worked. As soon as the master finished sharpening, Riku immediately moved on. The whole process required silence and complete concentration. The knife was finished in his hands, so Aizo acknowledged her patience. Later, Riku examined what had been made. On the blade, judging by what she saw, there was much more shine and quality here than usually occurs. It was not just a craft, the level of mastery in every detail was striking. It was made so skillfully that even among dwarves such a thing is extremely rare. Iso decided to give the knife to Riku, and Riku was embarrassed by such an honor because she was not sure if it was truly appropriate. For him, a blade of that level is not something easily sold. And now, since she had become his apprentice, Riku herself became part of his household. Riku accepted this with gratitude and firmly resolved to continue learning and training to someday become just as skilled. From Iso came a casual response as if in passing but with a warm nudge. Don't give up, keep going. That's exactly what happened. Samia returned and reported that the meat had already been processed and the hides were prepared for tanning. She glanced aside and saw Rika also had a knife, so her surprise revealed everything. It became clear that he had taken one out. Later they went outside. Food was already being prepared there. They were seated in pairs and three sat to eat together. During the meal, Rika couldn't contain her curiosity about Iso's abilities. Could he use magic? And it quickly became clear. His magic was limited to simple skills. Samia said that being able to forge and wield magic at the same time was a true miracle. She also added that Iso had a surname. Her gaze fell on him, she froze and held her breath, waiting for him to call her. And when it happened, the name sounded Tanya. Rika repeated this in her mind, and with each day she became more attached to this thought. But this confused Samia. The connection was established too quickly. But for Rika it was quite clear. As an apprentice, she now worked at the same forge, so this name only more clearly marked her place. She reasoned that being under Iso meant she would be known as Rika Tanya. Iso heard her train of thought and agreed. She had come to exactly that conclusion. Rika suddenly remembered that she had never introduced herself by surname before, so she thought, if it had to be that way, the blacksmith could simply be named after Iso. And Samia almost instantly picked up the idea and began to identify herself with that name. Iso felt a strange, slightly awkward embarrassment. The very thought that others would say his name so openly was unusual for him. And Samia then said that it would be unfair if only one of them used his name. And she wondered if she should also change her name. Well, Iso quietly pondered and recalled. It was he who first invited Samia to live with him. Eventually he agreed. If they called themselves a family, there was no longer any reason to deny the real cause. Samia and Riku instantly blushed with happiness, and everything seemed to fall into place by itself. For Iso, who had previously considered himself only a temporary guest in this world, it was a small but still important change. Until now he had lived only by his work and had not thought at all about leaving anything behind. Now something more appeared, something that would remain with him. At the same time, he could not ignore the insight that came with Riku's reaction to his work. The abilities given to him by the cheat were not ordinary for this world at all. Even in his past life, the level of sharpness and cutting power he could now reproduce was by no means ordinary. Moreover, Samia became his apprentice, and more people gradually began to gather around him. Riku joined again and got down to work seriously, and Samia extended a helping hand, so Iso finally got more time to focus on crafting. As a result, the overall efficiency of the Iso workshop noticeably increased. Every week Iso went to the market in the neighboring town to sell his creations. During a routine visit, he suddenly recognized a familiar face somewhere in the crowd. Outside, Marius explained that recently, as soon as people came to inquire about Iso's items, the requests kept increasing. I understood it this way. This surge in demand was largely ensured by the people around him. They were enthusiastically praising his works. The traveling merchant, smiling, even hinted, later he would still buy something. Iso had knives, long swords, and spears. Each of these types had its own rank. A head was a universal type that he could produce in large volumes, the general mode. It was affordable and so sharp that even ordinary households bought it. Next was a higher performance version for those skilled with sharp tools. It was called the luxury model. The price remained moderate, experienced users liked it, and there was a feeling in the air that sales would soar even higher if Iso established a connection with a wholesaler. But beyond that, there was another hidden category. It was not displayed in the showcase. Iso revealed it only after a thorough assessment of the buyer's intentions, and it was called the stipulative class mode. This mode was developed by nurturing the full power of the unique ability that Watchcat had passed on to him. It operated outside the norm, and because of this, it became too dangerous, so it was impossible to give it to just anyone. For now, Iso quietly worried. The thought that he might never sell the goods tightened his chest, and he did not know what he would do next. After some time, Rucky approached him and said that everything had been sold out again. Iso had to admit again. He understood those who bought his things had probably already told others about them. Then Riku suggested an idea. Maybe it was time to replenish the supplies of iron, charcoal, and clay. Somiya immediately asked if there was a supplier of these materials and Iso confirmed. There was. The Watch Cat had organized both the house and the workshop, so even though Iso had plenty of food and materials, the supplies, as expected, were gradually dwindling. Iso tried on one thought in his mind, to ask for help from a traveling merchant. As if summoned by someone, the seller appeared. He looked at Iso. He really was still here. Just hearing that Iso was going to leave today, the seller rushed to him. Everything ended on time exactly when it was needed. Iso sincerely thanked him. The goods were sold out again, mostly because the merchant ordered large batches. The shopkeeper nodded and immediately agreed. Mostly people said that Iso's products had already become popular among buyers and they were itching to take more. Iso shuddered as soon as he realized. If he had known earlier, he could have brought those additional 10 items he made at night. The seller noticed. Iso was not only a skilled craftsman but also a person who calculated everything in advance. Iso in response thought about how usual it was to work with iron and at the same time how to keep an eye on the silver. The seller decided that it should be so and immediately announced a new plan. They decided to open a proper shop in the city, not just limit themselves to trading at the market. Iso smiled and nodded approvingly. The merchant thanked him and asked for his advice. Earlier he had dealt with a variety of goods thanks to connections in different places. But now he was going to open a shop right here. Taking advantage of the fact that within the walls of the new settlement, there were almost no restrictions on what could be sold. Iso became interested in this offer, so the merchant said. The shop could trade in cutlery and weapons, which Iso also manufactures. Iso doubted, could such an arrangement really be acceptable? The seller confirmed without any hesitation he already knew the quality of Iso's longswords. Iso paused for a moment in thought. Maybe the seller himself did not use them, but realized income from the free market is unstable. And at the same time, more and more people began snooping around his goods. It was enough for someone to see them in someone else's hands. Then Iso admitted that he himself hoped to settle this with a wholesaler. He made it clear. If the merchant agreed, he would entrust him with this role. The merchant gladly agreed and sincerely thanked him. In the same manner, Camillo introduced himself and said he was glad to meet Iso. Iso also gave his name and added that for certain reasons he lived in the Black Forest, and then they firmly shook hands. Camillo was noticeably surprised as soon as he heard this and immediately said, "Living in such a place is really strange." And when he examined Iso's abilities, he understood if he wanted, he could settle somewhere else. He said that for people like him, it was not uncommon to be accompanied by a beastman and a gnome. Next, Iso got down to business. He talked about the schedule, explained that wholesale deals would most likely take place once a week, and asked if it was possible to notify Camillo in advance about possible delays. Camillo readily agreed to this arrangement. In a moment, Iso remembered another concern and voiced it before putting a period to the negotiations. He said that he was almost out of various materials and asked if there was a place where he could get them. Camillo offered to take care of the purchases instead of him. Iso sighed with relief. He immediately understood how this would solve the problem, so he entrusted Camillo with the matter. Camillo clarified that the costs of the materials would be deducted from the price of Iso's goods. Iso accepted the condition, and they sealed the deal with a fist bump. Iso felt a pleasant relief. Finally, he had a reliable way to replenish his materials. Camillo added that the shop would open next week and asked Iso to bring his goods when he came, after which he immediately said goodbye. And so, in a week, here in front of the shop stood Riku, Samia, and Iso. She looked at the building with obvious surprise, so huge that even Samia was forced to gape. As soon as they stepped over the threshold, they were immediately enveloped by a variety of goods. Iso was glowing with delight. Rookie cast a glance at some very rare spices, and Samia caught an unusual anxious smell in the air. On the wall, as if on purpose, hung a real exhibition. One knife, a dagger, and a sword all in plain sight. As soon as these blades appeared before their eyes, it became clear without any explanation. They were really going to be sold, and both Samia and Iso felt it intuitively. Camillo immediately noticed that Iso had arrived and led them upstairs. In a moment, everyone was already settled, and Iso said he had brought knives, a long sword, and short swords for today, meanwhile asking how many to take. Camillo accepted all their requests without any hesitation, and this suddenly threw Iso off balance. He explained that sales were going well. Iso agreed but still noted. The shop was quite large, so he involuntarily wondered if the name Camillo had become known as a traveling merchant. Camillo said that his success was in a simple approach. He sells goods indiscriminately to ordinary townsfolk, travelers, and professionals. Iso compared this system to something like a supermarket. This, and then Camillo brought up a new matter. He recalled the request to make a custom sword that Iso would forge. When such a request was first made, he did not know how to react. Iso considered the idea of taking individual orders. He wanted to carefully choose who would work on his pieces, but at the same time understood if he completely refused, there would be no progress. Camillo asked if the request should be declined. Iso shook his head sharply no. He immediately made it clear he was not refusing, just wanted to choose more wisely to whom he would give his body. Camillo suggested first he would check the skill and character of the requester and then inform Iso. Iso agreed that suited him. Next, Camillo put forward a condition. The customer must come to his workshop in person. And to get there, they would have to pass through the Black Forest, a place where wolves roamed. Whoever overcomes this path will see what they are capable of. Camillo nodded. The condition was accepted. But he decided to entrust the character assessment to Camillo. He named the location of his workshop and ordered to open it only to those deemed worthy. Camillo agreed to the arrangement. Then Iso briefly addressed Samia and Riku, apologized, and immediately implemented his decision. Riku said she had no objections to her master Iso's decision. Samia shared the same opinion, so Iso felt sincere gratitude for their support. Camillo only responded with a quiet smile. Iso asked about the materials, whether they had already been prepared. Camillo confirmed everything was provided and the quantity was good, then led them further inside. They crashed into the warehouse. Izo noticed that he had the same size as in the store. Camillo showed these were the reserves. Izo was clearly stunned. He realized all this was collected in a week, so with such a stockpile, the supplies would last a long time. Camillo assured. With this amount, there would be no need to worry about replenishing stocks immediately. Then he leaned closer and quietly named the price. Iso looked surprised at how low it had fallen, about a quarter of the usual wholesale price. He was confused whether it was normal for Camillo to ask for such a margin, but the latter remained calm, as if even at this rate there was still profit. Iso accepted the explanation and no longer held back. In his mind, he calculated how to transport the materials. The quantity was enough to carry by hand, although it would be much more convenient with an assistant. He asked if Camillo dealt with carts and he replied no. But remember the unused cart he was going to throw away. If repaired, it would still serve well. Iso was satisfied with this. They asked how much it would cost. Camillo gave it for free and Iso froze in surprise. Camillo said that he did not need the thing and taking care of a regular client was, he said, normal. Iso doubted, was it really clean here and what had he done to deserve such treatment? A quiet thought flashed. Could there be something more behind that gesture? Camillo said that Iso looked like a supplier with great potential for the future. Having a person capable of supplying quality goods at a reasonable price is exactly what is worth its weight in gold right now. Iso perceived this as a contribution to goodwill. Iso acknowledged this and sincerely thanked Camillo for the help. Camillo accepted the thanks without any hesitation. Some time passed and all the materials finally ended up on the cart. And they were already getting ready to head home. Iso figured dragging this along the main road would be a bit inconvenient, but still believed it would safely get back in the same condition it was in. Reiki agreed with this. Iso decided to patch up the road a bit, and Rookie noted that this would make it easier for those requesting goods to reach them. Iso agreed. It sounded quite logical. But suddenly something grabbed part of my attention like thunder in the silence. She recognized the sign of the forest wolf in this and asked to stop just for a moment, and to wait a little. Meanwhile, Iso noticed. Since that very morning, everything remained as usual. The wolves were more anxious than usual. Mia suddenly realized the time had come when they were supposed to have babies. She guessed that in about a month, the babies would probably start seeing the wolf pups. And Iso for a moment imagined what those young wolves would grow up to be like. Rookie noticed that the wolves in this forest were unusually quiet, and a question spun in his head. Do they really not attack people at all? People, Samia explained. There is plenty of prey in the forest, tree deer and grass rabbits, so the wolves had no need to roam elsewhere for food. She added, as long as Iso and she are nearby, hardly anyone stronger would dare to attack. Iso understood this immediately. The strong are rarely taken as prey. Rick was tired of thinking what would happen to someone weaker if they were attacked. And he came to the conclusion, wandering alone is dangerous. Home, Samia said directly. Every time Rookie leaves the house, it is better for him to go together either with her or with Iso. According to Samia, the wolves of this forest are strangely intelligent. Their social behavior is not at all like ordinary terrestrial wolves. Wolves, in such places, they cultivate vigilance and flexibility, perhaps even raise their intelligence to compete with the wealth of the forest. And Samia added, besides wolves, sometimes bandits appear even when she and Iso were nearby. Dangerous people were still around, so ears must be alert. She gently rubbed her belly. Suddenly, Iso remembered something troubling. The black bear that once attacked Samia was still lurking somewhere in this forest. Even for Samia, a tiger-like beastman, such an encounter would be deadly dangerous. The idea that a dangerous opponent could become a real threat flared up, then immediately vanished. Instinct immediately caught his attention nearby. Something rustled, and he gripped the cart tighter. Heavy footsteps were approaching louder and louder with each moment. What emerged from the shadow was a huge black bear stood nearby, a stunning, inevitable presence of wild nature. As soon as the stock of materials was replenished, they resumed creating new products. Iso reviewed the results and decided that the outcome was quite good. Riku immediately noticed. These new items were even better than the previous ones. The materials they obtained were truly high quality. Iso accepted her decision. He trusted her assessment and decided it was time to move on. They poured ore from Camillo's shop into the magical furnace and smelted it into steel, leaving almost no slag. It caused no delays and did not wear out, so it could be used again and again. The efficiency was stunning, and Riku was still enchanted by how magic was woven into such processes. From the perspective of ordinary things, the workshop should have relied on human labor, but having such a supplier felt almost like an incredible advantage. Iso even felt he was about to lose control and apologize to the craftsmen of this world, but in his heart he was sincerely grateful because it gave them to do detailed work even when you are deep in the forest. Several days passed. ISO finally officially acknowledged they had fulfilled their production quota. And as soon as this happened, Iso finally began repairing the house. Samia called him right then. Iso immediately focused on her, felt she was about to show something. With a gesture, she made it clear, since he had finished for today, he should go with her. When Samia announced the result, Iso froze in surprise. The house repair was already finished. Even the roof was ready, so everything looked exactly as it should be. Iso sincerely thanked Riku, acknowledging that their hard work truly meant a lot. And Riku gave Samia all the praise for her efforts. Iso immediately felt guilty. He realized that in a week he had done almost nothing for the house. While Iso was fully immersed in blacksmithing, the repair fell on the shoulders of Samia and Riku. With Riku's experience and Samia's tireless work, everything went smoothly and reliably. Easy? Iso thought that managing everything together was probably incredibly difficult, while Riku meanwhile believed that they were naturally stronger than humans. Iso sincerely thanked them once again, then said that he asked Camillo to prepare bedding for them next time. After that he was getting ready. First they would take the door, then the bed, and pull out the necessary tools. Riku couldn't let go of the question, could they really install the door in this very room? Iso confirmed that it would be so and asked if everyone agreed. Rika pondered. In most cases, if it was not a noble house, doors existed only in the guest room or in the head of the family's room and also in the one belonging to Hisher's significant other, while the rest of the family crammed into a single room. Samia admitted she had no experience living in a real house, so there was nothing to compare it to. Their Iso quietly realized he speaks relying on the common sense of his native world. But still, Iso firmly decided they must have separate rooms, one for the apprentice, the other for the family. Samia and Riku agreed without objections. Then Samia asked if Iso was going to the city, and Iso immediately said he would not go this week. Riku understood today was a day off and began to think about what to do. Iso answered, and a calm, restrained expression spread evenly across his face. But without noticing it himself, since Iso ended up in this world, he had not had a real day of rest even once. To maintain a balance between work and life, they worked without a strict schedule. Every day they continued their efforts tirelessly. And fortunately, sales through Camillo's shop were going great. They did not save a large sum, but they still managed to set aside some of the earnings. That is why Iso decided to step back and finally allow himself to truly rest for the whole week. Walking, Samia pointed ahead with her hand to one place and ordered to stop right there. Iso looked at him and decided that it was suitable. It seemed absolutely logical to them, so they decided to settle right here. They marched for almost an hour from home until they reached the river's headwaters. Here it is, the long-awaited slow life, the long-awaited day off. Iso decided to use this time for what he had long dreamed of. He wanted to, and simply crafted himself a fishing rod from natural materials. A thread from home and a hook from a processed rivet turned into a homemade fishing rod. Iso lifted a stone, confident bait was hiding underneath, and so it happened worms were found there. Rumia clearly felt uncomfortable, while Samia simply glowed with excitement. Iso quietly watched them. He wondered how differently they reacted to the same moment, and noticed how each of them was completely immersed in it. Then they started fishing, and Iso suggested to Samia to let the line out a little more. Iso allowed himself to simply breathe in the silence, and not worry about anything. The moment was finally his. The weather turned out to be truly gentle. No extra worries, no unnecessary fuss. After exhausting work with almost no breaks, he finally reached a place where he could eat properly and finally get some sleep. But the habit of constantly pushing himself did not let go, as if even here he continued to rush himself and didn't even notice it. He sat slowly, relaxed, until a question surfaced in his mind. When was the last time he felt something like this? But as soon as he thought it, the fishing rod suddenly jerked sharply. Iso gently asked, "Just don't move it yet at all so the fish can calmly take the bait." And just at the right moment, he gave the signal. Samia skillfully caught a fish. Iso immediately recognized it as a success, and Raki ordered to put it on the ground to remove the hook. Iso quietly watched them and noticed. After working together, Rookie began to speak more freely and casually with Samia. It seemed they were both truly enjoying themselves, sorting through the fish that Samia had caught. Soon it was noon. Samia pulled out one fish, Riku two, and Iso caught nothing. A lot, Iso quietly got irritated. In 3 attempts he pulled out only waterlogged wooden fragments and leaves instead of fish, so Sumi asked if he might be radiating too much deadly intent. Intent? Iso did not immediately understand what she meant. A slight confusion flashed across his face, and Samia noticed this and explained that fish are living creatures that become wary when they sense something too strong nearby. Iso pondered and decided there is no point in rushing, it is still midday. Soon Samia lay down and yawned. Iso looked at her, and soon Riku also relaxed. Both peacefully fell asleep. Iso remained sitting and thought. This was supposed to be a normal day off rest. What is the point of chasing results? One just needs to relax and calm the thoughts. Mind. After some time, Samia woke up again and yawned again. Suddenly she realized, since early afternoon she had not managed to catch anything. Soon her thought caught on the difference between fishing and hunting. You can't set a trap there, nor can you endlessly change places, and that was what annoyed her. Iso thought about hunting, and immediately remembered, during hunting Samia always pulled out all the entrails, leaving only the heart. He couldn't get out of his head what happened to that heart. It was never returned home. Samia quietly said she would bury the heart underground in the forest. The forest, Samia explained that when the soul returns it sprouts new life, and Iso realized the heart is the soul. A pit, she added that wolves and other beasts came to eat what was not buried, so some fragments remained nearby. The beasts lurked and watched. Iso was petrified in thought about this custom of beast people in the forest. In the silence he finally ran through in his head, when will the end come for him in these parts? The earth, could it be that his own soul, which came from another world, could also become part of this forest? They moved to another place for fishing, but there the fish did not bite either. The sun was already rolling toward the very sunset. It seemed as if it was finally time to give up, but no. Samia and Riku had caught 3 fish since morning, so each of them should get exactly 1. And Iso bitterly realized he could not catch anything, although this day was supposed to be a rest day. And then he felt it almost physically. His honor hung by a thread, both as the head of the household and as a skilled craftsman. He decided, no matter what the result turned out to be, he would still catch at least 1 fish. Samia noticed his determination and smiled. She was pleased that it was so clearly reflected on his face. I doubted whether it was really that obvious, so I was a bit confused. At that moment someone's eye felt something was approaching. Iso noticed this too and looked intently at himself. He hesitated for a moment, whispering to himself, "Calm down," because he knew haste would only scare the fish away. Calculating the moment to the second, he jerked the fishing line and indeed pulled out 1. Iso lifted the fish, shook it slightly, and a small smile flashed on his face. He was satisfied that he finally caught 1. Samia decided that his reaction was a bit awkward, and Riku thought the result was simply wonderful. Although Iso caught few, all 3 sincerely enjoyed this time, finally relaxed, and felt that their outing was coming to an end. It was time to return home. Iso thought how to go back to work again tomorrow. They worked all day both on the craft and on repairing the house. Finally, the heavy burden that had always hung over the start of the new workday stopped pressing down. It was then that he suddenly realized he was eagerly awaiting the return to the life of a blacksmith. It was as clear as day. Iso was truly happy with the life he now led in this new world. After some time, they returned home and arranged a small, cozy celebration. Iso acknowledged the efforts of Samia and Riku. He truly appreciated the work of that day, so at that pace, they could rest a little before the next stage of expanding the house. Finally, their home began to take shape for real. Both Samia and Riku felt a quiet pride and pleasant excitement. In every newly built room, a simple window and door were already installed. Likewise, a mattress and bed frame were brought into each room. Samia and Riku finally got their own rooms, and Iso remodeled his space. The very room where he used to sleep was turned into both a guest room and a study. room. Thanks to this, they could finally live decently each separately in their own room. Riku was a little worried. For the first time she had her own room and she had not yet gotten used to it. Samia, on the contrary, again immersed her thoughts in sowing in the field, and Iso was pondering. They decided to try whether it would be possible to get seeds during the next visit to Camillo. While the house was being expanded, they simultaneously cleared and prepared the land nearby for sowing. Until now they had stayed near the forest. They took meat and nuts from there, but vegetables still had to be bought. Iso wanted that, if everything went as planned, they would plant their own and step by step become more independent. Iso decided that the unsold training hoes and sickles they had once made would finally be useful. Now they had a real purpose. Riku understood and felt this immediately. She would prepare the field for the first time, and was so excited she blazed with enthusiasm, because Iso was so good at it. Samia shared almost the same feeling and noticed. Iso seemed to have too broad a worldview. But Iso reacted without unnecessary words, just feeling that such emphasis was completely unnecessary. Everything Iso understood grew out of what he learned in the previous world, and from the knowledge he gained with his second chance at life, so for others it really looks strange. Yet still, Iso suddenly realized. Even in that former world there were many things he simply had no idea about. That night when Iso was already about to go to sleep, while he was drifting off to sleep, a thought quietly surfaced in his mind. It had been quite a long time since he last slept in a normal bed. Since he came to this world, he had been dozing continuously at his desk. As if he had brought from a previous life, the habit of resting exactly there, and he himself could not understand whether it was good or bad. On the outside, he looked like a 30-year-old, but inside he carried the experience of a man already over 40. Sometimes he really thought that finally he could relax. The next day, a woman stealthily approached their house. Samia immediately felt her presence, as if someone quietly stood behind. She turned her gaze outside. Izo noticed this and asked what exactly had caught her attention. Samia immediately realized someone had come. A loud knock banged on the door and a voice solemnly declared, "Camillo sent me. I want to order a sword." At the very impact, Izo shuddered. He reacted instantly, and Samia tightly gripped the knife at the ready in case something went wrong. Izo moved to open the door. As soon as the door opened, he greeted the visitor warmly. The woman asked if he was the blacksmith who supplies weapons to Camillo's shop. She introduced herself, "My name is Helen." Izo noticed how her voice echoed loudly, and he confirmed his identity. In the city, he recognized her as his first client and invited her inside. They took their seats. Iso wondered if she had come alone and confirmed, yes. Then he remembered the dangers lurking in the forest, and Iso had encountered no troubles. Helen said that finding this place was not easy, but she still followed the trail of smoke and managed to reach it. She also felt that a strange, interesting atmosphere hovered in Iso's workshop. Iso decided that wolves usually flee from those who have significant power. Iso understood this. She herself entered the forest and found the workshop, successfully escaping the condition. So he accepted her request and began forging a sword specifically for her. Then he wondered, why did she need it? Helen untied and handed over her current sword, making it clear that she was a mercenary. She was looking for something similar in shape, but much more powerful due to the nature of her work. She rarely had the opportunity to properly maintain weapons on the battlefield, and still survival or defeat was decided by how skillfully one wielded them. Iso recognized this weapon, a pair of short swords. As soon as he took them in his hands, he immediately noticed numerous scratches and chipped edges. His gaze stopped on their worn surface. What Iso created is not just things, but real weapons. If he forged them with his own strength, then no enemy, no matter how great, would have any chance, and therefore, people would inevitably suffer from his creations. This was a truth he could neither ignore nor bypass, and now he was forced to accept it. The effect overwhelmed him, and no matter how hard he tried, he would never get used to it. Iso admitted Helen's swords were masterfully made. He felt the skill of their creator in these blades and decided to show them to Rikai's apprentice. So he did. Helen did not object, and Rick carefully examined the blades. She concluded that it was truly good weaponry, and quickly understood. If Helen wanted something better, giving it to her master was the only way out. Helen responded with noticeable confidence, seriously weighing Rick's words. And Iso switched to finding out exactly what these swords were intended for, and for a moment unsettled Helen. He wanted to know exactly how the swords would be used. This would mean that his work was starting even before the first hammer strike. Helen felt how important this was. And they decided, instead of explanations, it was better to show. They went outside. Helen drew both swords and immediately began to demonstrate her skill. Her attacks flew swiftly but were measured precise to the last movement. Iso watched closely, reading every moment of her speed. He understood the pattern. One blade keeps the opponent under control and pressure, and the other delivers the decisive strike, but even so, her pace was still stunning. Iso looked more closely and suddenly caught something wrong. At that moment, he focused on her condition. Helen felt that showing it alone was becoming much harder. She looked at Iso as if suggesting, with a partner, it would go better, and this suddenly unsettled both him and Samia. Iso thought, if Helen wants sparring Samia as a beast person, will get used to fighting faster and better than him. However, Helen felt something for the first time. Iso is stronger than Samia. Samia reacted slightly irritably to this impression. She admitted that there might be some truth in the words, but she still did not like it. Iso pondered, since he found himself in this world, he had never fought for real. But the body seemed to know how to move by itself, as if it was created for fighting from the very beginning. It was not just a desire, rather an instinctive knowledge. He knew exactly what he had to do, as if some force inside him was paving the way. Iso accepted everything as a given and got ready. He decided, Helen only wants to demonstrate skill and does not intend to seriously injure him. Iso stepped forward and stood right in front of her while Samia and Riku quietly watched. He hoped the conversation would not turn into constant tension, and Helen really did not hesitate. She moved first, closing the distance in. Iso like lightning, she managed to block the attack and immediately covered him with an avalanche of quick strikes. He stood firm and parried each one. Then Helen retreated. Iso responded with a countermove, and Helen blocked it. Her movements were so sharp that Iso saw them only in flashes. He lunged forward and held her pace with all his might, yet he still understood that without his own ability, he would neither be able to move nor keep up with tracking the attacks. He would be instantly overwhelmed. So keeping up with her movements demanded his full attention without any remainder. Helen struck again with a side attack. Iso managed to dodge, but the blow passed so close it almost cut a part of his hair. And it immediately became clear, Helen was no longer holding back, she was striking for real. She went on the offensive again without any hesitation. A little later they both froze in place, catching their breath. Iso felt that he had indeed stayed on his feet, and Helen openly acknowledged his strength. Iso felt a slight irritation. He understood he had been on the defense the whole time, only dodging, fending off blows. Helen smiled and admitted that from the very first few strikes, she had decided to end the duel. Few dared to directly challenge her thunder sword, and she admitted that she got a little carried away before apologizing. Iso felt it in his body and head. Now he understood more clearly what exactly he needed. He estimated that he could manage to make the sword in 2 days, and hoped that she would return in 3. Helen hesitated. The very thought of leaving immediately stopped her, while Iso carefully calculated how she might react. While Helen focused on taking up sparring again after a short break, Iso realized, if things continued like this, he would not be able to work on the sword. Helen understood the essence and adjusted her approach. Instead, he eagerly expressed a desire to observe the forging process itself. Iso remembered that the work would last 2 days, so Helen suggested staying there for that time. Suddenly, Iso realized, he had already prepared the guest room, the bed was in place, and he glanced at Rika and Samia before making a decision, allowing her to stay. Helen noticeably and cheerfully rejoiced and lightly hit Iso. That's right, Iso Smiths. The forge finally accepted its first client. After talking with Helen, Iso again took up the rest of the day's tasks. He wanted to finish everything that was left. Samia approached him and reported that she had cleaned the burrs. Iso nodded and ordered her to leave the parts where they were. Samia switched to cleaning and focused on straightening her arrows. Iso shouted loudly at her. Seeing that she acted more skillfully, Iso expressed his gratitude to her, and Samia responded with a simple, satisfied gesture. Her tail lightly wagged. Every time Samia was not hunting, she helped Iso in the workshop. Mostly her work boiled down to casting and removing burrs, and it seems that this was where she found true satisfaction. Iso thought maybe it was time to let her take the hammer in her hands. Nearby, Helen silently watched them as they worked. After a while, Iso gave a sign, time to have dinner. Helen recalled, on the way she was surprised by an exceptionally large deer. Samia recognized it as a roe deer and realized that such creatures could cause trouble if angered, so Helen remembered this. And she added, she even noticed a bear from afar. Iso and Samia shuddered at the information heard. As soon as they spoke about the bear, Samia involuntarily pressed her hand to her stomach again. Iso quietly pondered, the bear was still somewhere nearby. Helen noticed how their state changed and immediately understood this could mean something. Iso told that once a bear attacked Samia and she almost died. Helen thought about it and believed. If her equipment had been in perfect condition, maybe she could have defeated such a creature. Iso warned, do not take risks in vain. He knew that this bear was dangerous even for Samia, who knows the forest well. He made it clear, if something unforeseen happens, it will be difficult for them to endure the consequences. Helen caught this and understood his concern. After a while, Izo lightly touched his face with his fist to focus again. This was their first individual order, so he gathered all he had for the work. Izo started with a magical spell. Helen plans to check the progress the next day and meanwhile went to the forest with Samia to explore the area and collect materials. When Izo remembered how skillfully Helen once wielded swords, he heated the iron and carefully began forging, keeping the blade evenly thin and extracting the maximum from each piece of available material. He was helped by a special sight. He saw the structure of the iron deeper almost as if he could distinguish its particles. Izo continued smoothing out the irregularities, shaping the blade strike by strike, and with each movement the quality of the weapon steadily increased. Then he decided to test his own strength. He ordered Rick to bring a short sword of a common model, and she obeyed without hesitation. He stuck this ordinary blade into the trunk of a tree, firmly securing it in place. Then he struck him with a freshly forged, custom-made sword. His hopes were fully justified. The blade turned out to be strong and there were no visible damages on it. Riku froze, he couldn't believe what he saw. Iso looked at the simple sword and suddenly realized, such an item can no longer be mass-produced. For sale, Riku hoped that after some minor refinement or sharpening it could still be sold. But Iso decided otherwise even though the quality was still at an acceptable level. Acceptable, but he was not going to sell an item that had just been used to test another weapon. However, he decided to remake it and keep it for home use. Riku saw in this a trait of his character, a craftsman stubbornly holding to his principles. Iso accepted this with barely noticeable satisfaction. He could be called stubborn, but that never meant he was foolish. Even if these abilities were given to him as a gift, he decided to pour all his determination into his work. Working like this, he felt that the job he had long dreamed of was finally approaching. And this thought gave him quiet, warm satisfaction. Finally, Iso carved a mark at the end of the handle and at that moment realized the first sword was already ready. Riku really wanted to examine it, and Iso allowed her to take it. Riku carefully inspected the sword, the gaze sharp, unwavering. Iso noticed how she was intently staring at the blade as if no detail could escape her attention. Then he himself wondered, does the blade live up to the expectations placed on it? Riku realized neither an ordinary nor even an average talent could handle this. She thought about Izuha and honestly admitted despite the reason for his departure, the North still suffered a great loss. Meanwhile, Izuha kept turning this thought over in his mind, doubting whether his skills were really at that level. Riku does not back down from his conviction, he holds firmly to it. Iso felt something tighter than usual in his hands. The power was strange and even looked unreal. Using this ability fully consciously, he finally realized one truly important thing. This time his work was based on iron and strength, so the blade by design should not cut through, for example, a giant boulder. But if he chased only one sharpness, then it could really become true. And then an incredibly powerful weapon would appear in the world. Suddenly it occurred to him, what if we take materials stronger than iron and test it in practice? Having found the golden mean between endurance and hardness, he could make a weapon that combined both qualities. Iso understood this immediately, without a shadow of doubt. In other words, if he acted recklessly, he would not only have disrupted the user's course, but also driven them into much greater danger. And if the weapon he created suddenly becomes a strategic instrument of power, then he would have to stop and honestly ask himself, would he have the strength to bear this responsibility? Riku called her master, feeling guilty and anxious, wondering, what if she accidentally said something offensive? Iso gently calmed her. Everything is fine, he is just going over things in his head and thinking them through. Iso decided that he must not give in to dark thoughts about what has not even happened yet. But as soon as he realized this, everything fell into place. From now on, he would have to keep these fears to himself when taking orders. And now the most important thing was different. He had created something that made Rick sincerely happy, to become his apprentice, and that was enough not to ask for more. In a moment, Samia and Helen returned from their walk. They had gathered quite a lot. Medicinal herbs that restrained suppuration and various bitter and sweet plants. Samia immediately noticed, that day the wolves were more restless than ever. All this seemed to be explained by that large black bear that Helen had seen. Iso froze for a moment, as if accepting what had happened, and again glanced at his food. He calmly looked at Samia, and she looked away with obvious satisfaction. Iso quietly focused on the thought that the bear was nearby, and worried not only about Samia, he kept Rick in mind as well and clearly understood. He had to be careful not to drag them into danger. The next day, Iso took up work again. He immersed himself in forging the second blade for a special order, while Helen carefully watched his every move. Watching the work, Helen noticed how Iso worked smoothly and quickly. movements confident, precise, without any unnecessary fuss. Riku was not surprised at all. He knew that such speed of work posed no difficulties for Iso. While she pondered whether she could ever match him, Helen suddenly realized. Even devoting her whole life to the craft, she would hardly reach his level and accepted it. However, she believed in Iso's skill without hesitation. Iso overheard their thoughts, and a warm, sincere feeling of gratitude spread within him. At the same time, he was troubled by unease. He knew that a significant part of his abilities was a gift, and each such high praise turned into a personal burden. Helen recognized the blade. It held lightning-fast power. Iso acknowledges this and officially confirmed it. He solemnly declared, "Both swords are finally ready." He carefully placed them on the table. Helen clearly rejoiced as soon as she saw this couple. She felt the same lightning-like energy, and at that very moment was filled with the desire to try. But Iso stopped her. He noticed it was already late and explained that she could try them the next day. He realized he had stayed longer than planned, so he made her wait. Then he asked her to impatiently wait until tomorrow. At first she stubbornly refused, but eventually gave in and agreed, giving up further tests. Finally, Iso began preparing dinner. Samia, Helen, and Riku could not contain their joy. Samia immediately recognized the dish: forest venison steak. This dish simply stunned them. Helen suddenly realized. The raspberries they had picked earlier were already added to the dish, and this was a complete surprise to her. Riku again felt this in her mind. Even in the previous house, she had never tasted anything like it. Iso explained that, having completed his first individual order, he considered this meal a small celebration for himself. Samia immediately understood everything and sincerely thanked him, and Riku responded to her just as warmly and openly. Likewise Iso, he took their words to heart and noticed how Riku stayed close and encouraged him throughout the work. Helen reacted as always, cheerfully and sincerely greeted. Iso realized. It was her request that put everything in place and sincerely thanked her. The next day they went outside, and Helen was preparing to test the varieties, feeling how the weapon comfortably fit in her palms. Yesterday's excitement did not let go. It did not allow her to truly rest. Iso watched as Helen began to practice the blade in the test, and encouraged her to swing it more confidently. This Helen instantly dashed forward. Cutting through the air, she moved with precision and lightning speed. Samia and Riku froze in admiration. When Helen tested the sword, she immediately understood. Its true quality was exceptional. Channel, she put down the weapon and dashed. Iso, frozen as if rooted to the spot, they suddenly pulled each other into an embrace. Helen sincerely said that she was incredibly glad. Iso had chosen this task not in vain. Iso felt relief. Helen was satisfied with the result. She squeezed his neck tighter, and Iso's body was immediately filled with growing tension. Iso explained, he has already checked the strength of the weapon, so if anything happens he will fix everything himself. And she, if convenient, can visit Camillo's workshop or come directly to his home. After this, their conversation just as quickly returned to the question of payment. Iso left the amount to her discretion. Let her decide how much it is worth. Helen could not understand its value, but Iso explained simply. Accuracy does not matter here. The main thing is that everything works according to the agreement arranged through Camillo. So Helen stretched out everything she managed to grab, 2 gold coins and several silver ones. Iso agreed without any hesitation, and that is exactly how the agreement was concluded. Helen froze sharply as if a current pierced her mind. Could this amount really be acceptable? It is even greater than what Helen paid for her previous weapon. Iso sighed with a groan, trying to calm himself. Her old swords were made no worse, so for him this exchange was truly fair. Helen gave a satisfied smile and barely nodded. Their faces froze for a moment in battle expressions, and then they firmly shook hands. She made the last farewell gesture and walked away. Iso pondered her strength and finally realized what exactly she was capable of. Samia noticed how much effort it once took her and Rick to keep Helen away from Iso. Rick snorted, Helen was so loud, and Iso smiled quietly. But after that, Iso once again immersed himself in their usual work. Enrica decided to check how many short and long swords they currently had, and Samia helped her with this. But in just 2 days, a sudden turn occurred. The time finally came to face the dangers of nature face to face. One day Samia rushed back at full speed just when, as if fleeing from someone, she ran to the house. Iso noticed that Samia returned earlier than they expected and immediately felt something was wrong. Fear was clearly visible on her face. She came across a huge black bear, and Iso checked her apartment to see if everything was all right. They checked her condition. Samia assured that she was fine. She ran away without even having time to think about it, deciding that it was already an escape. Although she knew for sure, the bear had a sharp nose so he could still find her. Iso exhaled with relief. She is safe. And immediately his thoughts whirled back to what needed to be done now. Done, Samia probably ran into that bear somewhere nearby, and if it continues to roam freely, they could run into it again at any moment. A real threat that Samia or Riku might be attacked. He was bursting with this realization until he pushed that thought aside. Iso gathered his courage and set off. Samia reacted instantly. As soon as he took a step forward, someone immediately tried to stop him. Iso drew his spear, deciding that it would be enough, and was ready to deal with the bear if it suddenly appeared. Before leaving, he ordered Samia to firmly lock the doors both in the house and in the workshop. Samia wanted to go with him, but Iso refused. He understood, if everything suddenly becomes dangerous, he will not be able to guarantee her safety. This thought unsettled Samia, but Iso calmed her, trusted his own judgment. The matter was not about doubting her archery skills, but about his decision to face it all alone. In his head, that previous exchange with Helen flared up again. It was then that he was finally convinced. During the fight, the body would respond as needed. Even when he restrained the blow, the knowledge inside controlled the movements as if the body already knew how to fight. Samia could not calm down at all. Her body barely trembled as she watched him prepare. Riku also felt the same anxiety and sincerely hoped that he would return whole and unharmed. Iso nodded to both and held on to one thought: not to fall and not to abandon them. Having settled this, Iso rushed towards the bear. Behind him, the house was firmly closing, and Rika quietly prayed for her own safety. Samia looked at her and followed, picking up that silent hope. For now, Iso was making his way forward through the rain-soaked forest allard, watchful. He held himself as if ready. Instincts decided everything, catching every change around and going where the danger was felt strongest. Usually, he relied on Samia to track threats, but before something like a big black bear, his instincts, sharpened by this ability, triggered sharply and without hesitation. The rain hit his hand-dulling sensation and muffling sounds, so the bear noticed worse than him. The harsh weather suddenly became an advantage, and Iso's eyes sharply widened as soon as he saw something ahead. He staggered, lowered his head, and quietly exhaled. A moment from his previous life flashed before his eyes. Back then he gave his life to save a cat. And now he stood here preparing to kill a bear. Here he is. The body has changed, but in the soul he remained the same as he was then. It all came down to one thing. Now he had something to hold on to, something that needed to be protected. Once there was a time when, enchanted by the everyday life of an overworked office worker, he saw nothing truly important in the world. But now he had a family, and there were people who valued what he created. As soon as he mastered himself, his gaze became sharper than a blade. He found a large black bear and positioned its body in the required pose. The bear stood before him, staring intently, and its presence radiated pure hostility. Iso was preparing for a clash, facing it head-on. The bear moved furtively with a grave intent. Iso understood, action was needed immediately. He did not feel hatred toward the animal, but he knew one thing: it had to be dealt with. The bear lunged forward and swung its massive claw. Seeing the attack, Iso dodged. He managed to feel both the swing and the furious speed of the strike. Even a single diagonal stroke could mean death. Waiting a moment, he dashed aside and thrust the spear into the bear's body. As soon as Iso realized that his strike did not work as he intended, the wound turned out to be too shallow. The bear roared in response. And while Iso glanced, it swung its paw again. This time the strike hit. He was pushed and flew into the neighboring tree. Falling was not an option, so he forced himself not to panic. He quickly got up, straightened his stance, and firmly grasped the spear. When the bear approached again, Iso seized the moment and thrust the weapon into its neck. The bear yelped in pain, and Iso's face became even sharper, more intense. As soon as he finally saw a chance to end the fight, he lunged toward the enemy swiftly and completely, devoted, with one will: to survive in this world and protect what had now become dear. With this determination, he plunged the spear deep into the bear's chest, and it collapsed. Iso watched closely and immediately understood this was not simple. It knew. It no longer moved or breathed. The fight was over for it. He pulled the spear from the body. He moved carefully, mindful of Samia's advice. A clean cut might look almost unnatural, but as soon as he looked at the bear, he understood everything immediately. Then he sat down and rested for a moment. That was his first battle. Then life truly hung by a thread for the first time. When the danger receded, he felt his whole body trembling. Even when his skills really decided everything, the outcome still boiled down to a tiny advantage. He examined himself. Bruises and scratches everywhere, but the bones, fortunately, remained intact. Iso got up again and pondered what to do next. He had taken a life with his own hands, so since it had happened, he would like to use it to eat the meat and return the remains to the earth. But he did not know if it was safe, so he finally decided to carry everything back. After some time, he returned. The rain was still pouring. Iso picked up the bear and threw it over his back. Even with increased strength, the weight was incredible, but he did not give up and stubbornly pulled on. He noticed the rain was already subsiding a little. Iso needed to return home as soon as possible before other dangers caught up with him on the road, for example, wolves. And he calculated that he had managed to cover about half the way. Suddenly he froze, something sharply tore him from his thoughts and in a moment caught his gaze. The very next moment someone grabbed him by the leg and pulled. But instead of him, Samkhya appeared in the frame, showing that a more instinctive side had awakened in her. Iso calmed her down. He was safe, they had already dealt with the bear. So Mia looked closely at him to finally make sure. She looked him over once more, ran her gaze over everything, checking if all was well, and Iso admitted. There were a few bruises and contusions, but no broken bones. They only glanced at each other for a moment before Iso found himself in someone's trouble again. Emotions burst out and tears flowed from her eyes. Iso froze from surprise, cried from relief, and clung tightly to him. He responded, gently stroking her head. Riku approached nearby and hesitated, unsure whether to intervene in their conversation. At that moment, Iso clearly made it known that she was. It was not so, Riku later explained that Iso stayed longer than expected and Samia was sure. If everything were fine, he would have already returned, so they decided to go out and look for him. Iso sensed danger. Leaving the house under such conditions was deadly risky. He knew Riku. Once Samia made a decision, she could not be stopped. She added that they were sniffing for Iso's scent and searching for bear tracks. And as soon as both started approaching, they immediately prepared for the worst, being ready for anything that might appear. While they waited and hid, Riku noticed. Iso and the bear emerged simultaneously, so at first it was hard to understand what exactly had happened. Iso figured out their actions and sincerely thanked them, and Riku in turn directed that gratitude to Samia. He spoke, tightly pressed. Samia felt his gratitude. During this time the sky cleared and Iso suggested returning home. After Samia, Mia. She calmed down and all three together pulled the bear. On the way, they decided to temporarily leave it by the lake, and the next day return and take it. As soon as they got home, Izzo was suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue, so Rick took on making dinner, and Izzo went to rest in his room. In the room, as soon as he took off his clothes, it immediately became visible how bruises covered his body. Samia rushed to check, fearfully not taking her eyes off every detail, and Izzo calmed her down, assuring her he was fine. Samia still couldn't calm down, uncertainly, but stubbornly she continued to watch him with her eyes. Izzo explained that he just needed to wash up. The fatigue weighed heavily on him mercilessly. He asked Samia to let him know as soon as the bath was ready. While he waited, he leaned against her and before. Soon he fell asleep. Samia froze for a moment in surprise, realizing he had dozed off leaning against her. She looked at herself and gently stroked his head. And already the next morning, Izzo felt a strange softness spread around him. Waking up, he sat up for a moment and with fear realized. Last night he hadn't washed, and the bed with the clothes was already completely different. At that moment, Samia entered the room. The two quietly looked at each other with signs without words, but everything became clear. Izzo understood. He had simply fallen asleep. Samia nodded. Izzo was sleeping deeply. She said that Riku was scared. If he continued to be dirty, he could get sick. So the two of them wiped him down and put him to bed. Riku entered the room and saw that Iso had already woken up. Iso sincerely apologized to Samia and Riku just smiled and said that his clothes were already washed, so there was nothing to worry about. Rika had already started to tell how Samia called him at night, but Samia immediately interrupted her. She did not want that to be mentioned. Rika himself saw nothing wrong with it. Samia gently led Riku out of the room and asked Iso to come as soon as breakfast was ready. Iso nodded, agreed, and was already about to leave. So the day started again, simple, usual, filled with everyday affairs. Teenagers are the quiet inheritance of life, which they themselves build for themselves. Somewhere in the estate the name was heard, Black Forest. The young lady shuddered as soon as she realized. She was ordered to hide in that forest. Nishan, that's what she called the one who said this, did not brush off with empty words. There really lived a blacksmith in the forest, and the letter had already been sent to a traveling merchant who knew where to find him. So all she had to do was deliver this letter to the merchant, and then everything would go according to plan. Nishan was confident that the blacksmith would treat her well. The young lady agreed and prepared. Meanwhile, in the growing city district, Iso was at Camillo's shop. They were discussing business, and Camillo agreed to temporarily take several goods from him even at Iso's home. The products had already gained a strong reputation. But Iso could not let go of another memory. He remembered a young guard who once helped him at the very beginning. He also heard that the guard had returned to the capital and had not been heard from since, so Iso wanted to find out what had happened to him. Camillo looked uneasy. He could not brush off this question and kept replaying in his mind why Iso was asking it. Iso just remembered the help he once received and once wanted to repay. The guard recently disappeared, so Camillo suspected that something bad was hidden here. Camillo admitted his concern, fell silent for a moment, and his gaze sharpened as if putting everything together in his head. Then he said, in the capital, among high-ranking nobles, people are increasingly talking about war. Maybe this is related to everything, and ISO froze with an empty look. That, and Camillo added directly, it's better not to know too much about such matters for ISO's own sake. ISO accepted the warning and sincerely thanked him. Later ISO, Samia, and Riku headed home pulling a cart filled with materials. And at the same time, somewhere on the road, there a young girl was running from pursuers. She glanced over her shoulder for a moment and suddenly realized that if it continued like this, she would be caught before she reached the city. Far from Samia, her ears suddenly twitched. She already caught hurried footsteps. ISO instantly looked back at her, tensely guessing, could these be bandits? Samia could not guarantee she heard correctly, but from the fragments it was clear people had already engaged in a fight. Isel made the decision without any hesitation. He ordered Samia to go first and find out what was going on there. Bandits or wolves, the difference no longer mattered. Samia immediately obeyed and rushed to where the noise was heard. Iso shouted after her, "We will be right behind you soon. Retreat immediately if you feel it's getting too dangerous." Iso pushed Rika forward and she moved immediately, without any pause or hesitation. A little later they reached the place, where a group of men were fighting with swords against a young girl, Samia. Iso swiftly drew a short sword, deciding to leave the baggage behind. There was no time to hesitate. He rushed straight into the thick of it and plunged his blade into the very heart of the clash. He saw everything and his anger rose higher and higher, more clearly than what was first reflected in his gaze. One of the attackers noticed him approaching and he instantly swung his blade. Iso just as swiftly parried the strike with his sword. He sharply pushed the man back to clear space and and immediately followed with a single motion, cutting across the lower back of the body. Then from behind, Iso was attacked by another assailant, a bald man. Careful, Samia caught it first and shouted a warning. Iso managed to hear her in time and tightened his grip even more. Clenched in his palms, he jerked sharply, and just then Iso turned and took a heavy blow forehead to forehead. The duel ended in a moment. The attacker's sword shattered from the blow, and Iso did not hesitate. In response, he plunged his blade into the man's chest. Seeing this, another man decided not to fight and tried to flee, but he didn't manage to escape. Samia's arrow hit him in the neck right in the middle of his run. Samia fired in time, and the shot hit cleanly. Even Iso froze for a moment. He was struck by the speed of what had happened. He looked back, glanced over his shoulder to see if anyone was left behind, and according to Samia, no one was behind. That was everyone. The rescued young lady sat silently. No sound, no step, only a watchful gaze at what the events had left behind. After that, Iso turned back to her again. He already understood. Now speaking would be difficult, but there was no time left. It was urgent to find out who she was and why exactly she had been attacked. Too many people had already died there, so the guards would definitely demand explanations later. He asked her to take this as a chance to repay the help they had given her. The more closely he looked at her, the stranger her face seemed familiar. There was something in her that instantly brought to mind an actress from his previous world. The girl, Young, was the first to thank for the rescue. She was saved, then she introduced herself, Diana Emile. Due to certain circumstances, she came from the capital to live with one specific person. Diana finally told what had happened. On the way, those men attacked her. Saying this, she clenched her hands, only now fully realizing how it could have ended for her if Iso and the others had not arrived in time. Iso quietly pondered. She bore a surname that usually signified status nobility from the capital. His thoughts immediately returned to the conflict Camillo had mentioned earlier. Could she be involved in it? He looked at Samia. She only quietly nodded, and that was enough. Iso understood there was no lie in Diana's words. Iso accepted what had happened and immediately took on the next problem. Bodies were already lying around them. There was only time left to count down. It was running out quickly. Soon a patrol of guards would inevitably pass by them. It all came down to a simple choice: to hide or to reveal everything. Everything. Diana decided to hide. Iso closely watched her reaction. Doubted whether she was truly confident, but she stood motionless. Those men had already surrounded her, and if they disappeared here, it would take time before someone realized they had been defeated. Iso quickly understood the true meaning of that answer and immediately saw. It gave her time to reach that specific person. Diana confirmed it without any hesitation. Iso realized there was no pure way back anymore. They had already been drawn in. When everything was settled, he gave the order, take the bodies to the forest. He asked Rika to pull the cart forward, and she immediately agreed. Then he called Samia to help with the rest, and she joined without any hesitation. After that, they took turns dragging the bodies. In that grim work, a thought stirred in Iso. For the first time, he truly understood what purpose the things he had created could serve. He did not know who was to blame for all this, could not say whether the young woman was guilty or the men who drove her, but at that moment, one thing became clear to him. He decided to protect his family. For the sake of the family, he felt neither regret nor hesitation for what had been done. He froze for a moment and silently looked at the fallen men. Then Samia noticed him and approached, trembling with anxiety. Was he wounded? Iso calmed her, assuring that everything was fine, and thanked her for her concern. And then, without any delays, he made the decision they would return home. Iso asked Diana to tell more about the person she was looking for, saying that if they understood the situation better, they could help her. Diana agreed and began to explain everything she knew. According to her brother, that man lives in a remote place. Iso immediately seized on the main detail: Diana really has a brother. Then she explained, the man settled there quite recently, and Iso quietly accepted this without objections. After that, she added something even more important. It was said that the man was a very skilled blacksmith. With him, the sword and knife of her brother both made by him, and as soon as everything settles down, the brother was going to come again to fix them. And it was then that everything suddenly fell into place in Iso's mind. Nothing strange, the face turned out to be familiar. Iso remembered the guard who once helped him Marius. Carefully, almost silently, he asked another question. Iso wanted to find out whether her brother's name was Marius and if he worked as a guard in the town beyond this outskirts. Diana immediately showed clear surprise. She confirmed her brother is Marius Albert Emile. But the surprise intensified even more as soon as she looked at Iso and mentally could not dismiss the question, how does he know his name? The answer put everything in place down to the smallest detail. The person her brother trusted, the blacksmith from the Black Forest, was Iso himself. He did not look away and admitted, yes, he really knew Marius. After that, Iso began to explain who that person was. The one her brother was talking about was most likely him. This revelation clearly caught Diana by surprise. Iso immediately understood why it happened. This is not something anyone would believe right away. Then all four of them moved forward again, shoulder to shoulder. At first, Diana kept the letter from her brother, addressed to Camillo, with her. The plan was simple: to find the one man who knew where Iso was and ask him to show how to reach him, and fate led her right there. As soon as Iso thought about it, it became clear that Marius intended to entrust his younger sister to that stubborn man who lived in the terrible Black Forest, a place most avoided. That was enough for Iso to understand. Diana was carrying much heavier worries than she had shown so far. Then Diana asked him, "What is your name?" Iso introduced himself and at the same time introduced those who were nearby: Samia, the beast person, and Riku, the gnome. I judge that while the trouble had not yet reached them, there was time. The guards would probably soon find everything, so the smartest thing was to first return to his home. Diana agreed and relied on their protection. Later they finally reached the place, and Iso decided, first to take care of the luggage and only then to eat. Samia was so vigilant that on the way back they did not encounter a single pursuer. The guest room might have seemed modest and a bit cramped for a young lady, but Diana settled in it without any complaints. Later, the smell inside what they served her clearly lifted her mood and seemed to melt all the tension. Iso quietly pondered, maybe someone really managed to lift her spirits. Someone who grew up in a noble family would probably savor these simple dishes without any hesitation. Still, he hoped she would agree. As soon as Diana tried it, her eyes instantly widened in surprise. She really considered it tasty. Iso, Samia, and Riku stared at her reaction together. As soon as she realized she was being watched, Diana got a little embarrassed. Her appearance made it clear that she hadn't eaten since morning, but was very, very hungry. Recovery? Rika was not worried at all. On the contrary, she was pleased to see Diana enjoying the food, and Diana herself clearly indicated without extra words. No formal treatment was needed. Then Iso thought, valuing good food is more important than status. Even in the toughest times, if someone could somehow eat properly, they inevitably managed to do so. Now Diana sincerely thanked everyone for accepting her so suddenly. Without any warning, she just appeared. And Iso silently observed her condition. She was pursued, almost killed, and forced to rely on strangers in an unfamiliar place. But if she still felt taste and genuinely reacted to warmth and food, it meant she was holding on better than expected. After dinner, the atmosphere became even more oppressive, and Iso again steered the conversation towards the reason she was expelled from the capital. He hesitated to ask for a long time, but now that she would be staying nearby, it was better for everyone to know the truth. Diana agreed. Then, with cold composure, she prepared to tell what was happening in her family in the Emile household. The Emile family, those who kept the accounts, ruled the region, which included the town of Camillo. Down, there were 4 children in that family: the eldest son Leon, the second son Coral, the third son Marius, and the daughter Diana. Usually, the heir's path was clear. As the eldest son, Leon was to become the count first, and just a month ago, everything suddenly went awry. In the remote region, a horde of monsters appeared, and the count set out to subdue it. Leon, as the heir, went along to fulfill his duty. But after the battle, both the count and Leon died. Even worse, the private army that went with them was also destroyed. Outside, as soon as the news of their death spread through the capital, Mari immediately returned there. During the investigation, he came across several suspicious details that surrounded this incident like a shadow. At first, it was claimed that a powerful monster attacked them, but no obvious traces of that creature remained, and the wounds on the bodies did not match either horn strikes or fang bites. They were cuts. So a human hand could very well have been behind these deaths. And as soon as this assumption took root, suspicion instantly fell on the one who benefited the most from their demise. The second son is Carol. Iso quietly insisted, trying to get to the essence what exactly was behind this. The answer turned out to be unexpectedly complex. Carol was an illegitimate son, so he knew well, any legitimate heir from a lawful wife ranks above him in the line of inheritance. After Leon's death, this role was to be taken by Marius. Iso, Samia, and Rick listened silently. As the picture came together, the puzzle finally began to fit. Carol's mother died shortly after childbirth, and out of pity, Diana's mother took him in, raised him as her own, and treated him the same as the others. Until that event, Diana had no idea about the deeply hidden family secrets. But reality suddenly shifted. If the issue of inheritance was not resolved quickly, the family could lose their position and court rank. There was no time to delay, because the ruling count was already gone. Diana quietly acknowledged this truth, and at that moment Iso felt a grim revelation. The one who wanted to kill Diana turned out to be no stranger. It was her own brother. Iso silently ran through it in his mind. Back then Marius seemed too clever for a simple city guard, and now everything finally fell into place. He found out Marius is the count's son, so everything was finally settled. Having looked at Marius's letter to Camillo, Iso decided without hesitation. For now, Diana would remain under their protection. Sudden kindness turned out to be a real surprise for her. He said that if something suddenly became unclear, she could turn to Samia or Riku, and both responded sincerely and joyfully, ready to help with anything they could. Diana accepted their care with noticeable gratitude. Iso voiced another thought. When everyone addressed her too formally all the time, the unnecessary tension only grew. If she spoke to them more simply, it would probably be easier for everyone to understand each other. The same proposal initially just threw her off track. She tried to adapt on the fly, stumbling over every small change until she finally got the hang of it. Iso approved, and it immediately became easier. Everyone laughed together. From the very next day, their daily life changed a little. Today, everyone together took up the household chores. Diana showed what to do and immediately warned it is dangerous to enter certain trees. Soon Iso announced that he was getting to work. Before leaving, he asked Samhya to look after Diana, and she agreed without hesitation. But what Iso expected and what actually happened turned out to be completely different. Diana, having offered to help, eventually joined him in the workshop. And then Samhya began teaching Diana all the steps of making weapons, and Iso, who was watching from the side, noted with surprise. Samhya strangely remembers well the methods he once taught her. Regarding Diana, despite her noble origin, it turned out she was stronger than everyone expected. Riku noticed that the day before, Diana confidently wielded his sword, so there was no doubt she already believed in her own strength. Later, when the workday ended, Iso decided to stop there. There he noticed and appreciated how Diana tried on her first day. Diana reviewed the finished swords and immediately saw a clear difference in their quality. Iso explained, the long sword is the standard model and the short sword is the higher class model. Diana asked to see the sword. Iso allowed it but immediately added, the handle is not finished yet. She took the blade in her hands and looked at it for a long time, focused attentively. That expression on Iso's face involuntarily triggered memories of Riku about their first meeting, and Diana was touched by the sword itself. Riku immediately agreed, recalling how she was first impressed by such a level of craftsmanship. Diana really felt it. Even in the capital, not every blacksmith could produce work of such quality. Iso quietly thought that he still knew little about the overall skill of blacksmiths in this world. But if he limits himself to selling only the higher class model, most likely, he will not stand out. He will simply present it as the work of a skilled master. Suddenly Diana looked at him and asked for a match. This request caught Iso by surprise. A duel with him, and with swords at that. Diana showed that she was truly determined. And at that very moment Iso suddenly realized, Diana also wanted a fight. She was madly eager to see him fight again, especially after she had seen him fight, saving her. Aizo instantly understood what she meant, but when he recalled that scene, he immediately realized there was almost no time left until night. He agreed, deciding that they would have time for one duel before darkness. Diana openly blossomed with joy. Aizo could not help but think that she was by no means like an ordinary noblewoman. Soon both prepared for sparring. She could not understand why all this pleased her so much, especially since the blade she chose looked too serious for a casual duel. Yet as soon as both were ready, the duel erupted into battle. Diana went first. She pushed forward with her foot, gaining speed, and with a lightning-fast lunge delivered a strike. Aizo cleanly parried it and responded with a counterattack, but Diana managed to dodge. Time flowed differently, blades clashed again and again. Sharp, tireless strikes replaced each other until both retreated. Aizo felt and noticed. Every her movement was swift as a blade and impeccably precise. She did not match Helen, but from her stance and sword work it was clear Aizo knew her craft. He gripped the hilt even tighter, and from the side Sumiya also noticed Aizo began to take the duel more seriously. Then Diana tried to lure him into a cunning feint. Aizo struck sideways so cleanly and quickly that she stopped it just before it would have hit her. Her result was obvious to everyone, but he stubbornly called it his victory. Diana, breathing heavily after exchanging blows, silently accepted the result. After the match, Aizo admitted, in fact, he was very tired from moving so much. Diana immediately felt something else in the fight. He was not serious at all. Aizo saw no reason to object. For him, it was just sparring. They were practicing strikes, and it never looked like a fight to the death. Yet Diana could not close her eyes to the result. She failed to land a single truly clean hit on him. Aizo still acknowledged her merits. From his point of view, she really did well. This response only further confused Diana. To hear that the one called the Rose of the Arena was described merely as doing not badly, she definitely did not expect that. Their Aizo looked confused, not understanding which title had just been named so indifferently. And then Sumiya drew a line under her comparison. Out of 100 fights against Aizo, she had won only one. The impression of this was much stronger for Aizo than the reaction of anyone else. Diana also froze. But as soon as the woman beast spoke, her words immediately amplified the already loud weight. Sumiya only confirmed what was said. Then Riku added one more detail. Aizo was so strong that he took Helen's blows directly to the forehead without any difficulty, as if it were nothing. And it was this comment that made Aizo rethink everything. He had already thought that Helen had given him only a minimal level of strength for self-defense, but now he lost confidence. As soon as Helen's name was mentioned, Diana reacted instantly. She knew without a doubt who it was. Helen was known as the Lightning Blade. Aizo recognized this name. It seemed familiar, and suddenly it surfaced in his mind. He had heard something like that somewhere before. Diana stubbornly tried to squeeze the truth out of him. Was it true that he withstood Helen's blows and did not fall? But Aizo responded casually. They fought for almost 15 minutes. This answer confused her again. For Diana, 15 minutes against Helen was not something ordinary. The matter, she explained. Helen earned the nickname Lightning Blade due to her stunning speed, and this fame spread far beyond ordinary fighters. She was even known among the nobility. Aizo quietly doubted whether Helen was really that all-powerful and still could not believe that he got out of that fight alive. Diana, meanwhile, was turning over her reputation in her mind, facing her head-on and returning a blow that was no small feat. But before she could comprehend, Aizo cut off the conversation and suggested going home. And then something completely unexpected happened. Diana suddenly dropped her sword, knelt down, and bowed deeply to him. This place is already strangely familiar to Aizo. And here she is with a trembling voice, asking to become his apprentice. Aizo was completely taken by surprise. He glanced aside and noticed. Sumiya and Riku were reacting to the events with too much enthusiasm. The pieces instantly fell into place in his mind. She was Marius's younger favorite sister, the Count's daughter, a young unmarried noblewoman entrusted to him. In front of him. And now she was kneeling right before him, so Aizo could only assume that in this world bowing was probably an everyday matter. After a few brief considerations, he agreed on one condition. If she trained once a day after work, he would allow it. And Diana's face immediately lit up. But Aizo immediately put everything in order. He would not give her real mastery of the sword and did not know how to teach properly, so she would mostly have to learn just by watching him. Diana agreed without any hesitation. Her mood instantly lifted, and Riku and Sami sincerely rejoiced for her. Watching all this, Aizo quietly realized. At home, Diana was probably a real tomboy. Holmes, he added one more rule: do not call him master and do not behave too formally around him. Diana nodded and agreed. And so, almost imperceptibly, Aizo took in a second apprentice even though she was not a blacksmith's journeyman. and his daily troubles quietly increased again. And from the very next day and onwards. During the day, Diana helped in the workshop, and in the evening the two of them exchanged blows, intercepting attacks with wooden training swords. It was clear Diana had undergone truly painful training. Her movements were agile, sharp, and lightning fast. Regarding Iso, the only thing he could really offer, relying on the self-taught style his cheat gave him, was repeated sparrings. And even those were enough to become a springboard for her growth. Everything was almost like Rick's blacksmith lessons. Iso became a living measure for them. Even if he couldn't properly teach them, both could rely on the principles they already had, and Iso was sure. Eventually, this would become valuable experience for both of them. In Emil's house, Marius sat alone. He was resting and sighed heavily. Only one name remained in his mind: Coral. Marius sincerely believed. After the funeral of his father and older brother, Carol would simply take the place of the new head of the family. But reality turned out to be completely different. He recalled the moment when Carol trembled with rage, shaky, like a disturbed whirlwind. Marius saw him in such a state for the first time. It happened very soon after the inheritance quarrels flared up again, and Carol, in a fit of frenzy, rushed out of the house. After that, strange events began to explode around Marius one after another, as if someone was pulling them out of the void. Suspicious documents surfaced. They were fabricated and planted one after another to ruin his reputation. And then assassination attempts, open, right in broad daylight. If it all came down to him alone, Marius was sure he would manage to defend himself or prove the truth. But Diana was already dragged into this game, and now everything had turned upside down. Above them also hung the event that happened a few days ago. A letter. Marius realized, to end this conflict he needed help from outside. And such a person existed. He could count on one man, but whether he would agree, Marius did not know. With this thought, he sat down to write. Later, deep in the forest, Iso was tracking something. He carefully searched the surroundings and fixed his gaze on a single point. There was no one near Bisso. He decided the time had come. And it really had. Standing there, Iso pondered. Since Diana arrived, only a few days had passed. He set off for the city to sell his goods, gave Camillo Marius's letter, and explained the situation. After that, they decided together how to proceed. Camillo had long known about the trouble. He hoped Iso would not get involved, but it turned out differently. Iso saw it completely differently. Diana was already in his confidence, and since then it was impossible to hold him back, so Camillo had to come to terms with this truth. Iso suddenly remembered the most important thing: he owed Marius. And if Marius needed a blacksmith, Iso was going to do everything he could to come to the rescue in time. Camillo finally understood everything. For this reason, they agreed on a secret place along the highway just by the forest, where they could secretly exchange letters. After a few days, Iso finally got in touch with him. Iso froze at the moment. She just read the contents of the letter. Everything was said there directly. By tomorrow, he must prepare everything needed for blacksmithing and be ready to depart for the capital. Someone will be sent for him already. There is no time to hesitate. Iso quickly told Samia, Rick, and Diana. She is heading to the capital, and the three of them are staying home. What troubled Riku the most was her blacksmith work. Iso ordered her, as always, to keep practicing. He looked once more to see if she felt confident before taking on the forge by herself. The bellows and materials in the warehouse were already waiting, so nothing was supposed to stand in the way. Iso then reminded that there was still food in reserve. He would definitely hold out for some time. And Samia only added, if the supplies do run out, she would go hunting and bring more. At that very moment, Iso quietly realized beside him was a real, reliable family, and he calmly entrusted them with his home. Diana felt guilty. She thought that Iso was getting into danger because of the quarrel in her house. Iso waved his hand. Marius was to blame, and that was his own punishment. This response made Diana sincerely smile. When the mood finally passed, Iso decided not to dwell on it any further for now. They would focus on today's work, and all three women agreed. The next day, driving on the highway, Iso noticed a carriage approaching. Camilla was in it. As soon as he pulled up, Iso shouted sharply, "Quick, get back in." Camilla apologized and explained that Iso would have to hide in the box. Some people must not see him. Iso agreed, but the box looked too cramped for a person to fit inside. But as soon as he opened it, he was overwhelmed with surprise. The bottom stretched much deeper than it seemed at first glance. It was cleverly hidden with a concealed compartment, so the storage looked smaller than it actually was. A simple trick, but in such times, tricks were valued even more than appearance. Iso was genuinely surprised as soon as he saw the secret compartment. Camillo waved it off, saying it's just the wisdom of a little stone. Time dragged on. After lying in the box for a while, Iso began to recognize voices and feel movements outside. Judging by how long the road lasted before he fell asleep, they had already managed to travel quite a distance. and the noise around them grew louder and louder. Then a decisive voice sounded as if clearing the way for someone and, in a moment, called the next person forward. Iso immediately realized. It seemed to be a checkpoint at the entrance to the capital. A guard outside questioned Camillo and identified him as a peddler, and Camillo calmly confirmed everything and explained that he had brought several goods with him. Next, the guard began the inspection. In the cramped box, Iso had to wait silently. The tension slowly grew because he caught every rustle, and the guard checked the stickers and decided that they were carrying fabrics and spices. After that, they were allowed to move on. Camillo thanked them, and the carriage rushed forward. Only then was Iso finally able to exhale and relax. It was clear they had already driven quite far from the checkpoint when the carriage stopped again. Camillo gave a signal no, it was Safine ordered Iso to get out. As soon as he was outside, Iso stretched his numb body and admitted that the road had been too harsh. Camillo nodded and apologized for the inconvenience. Iso sharply looked around. At first glance, this place looked like a forge. A voice somewhere nearby clearly confirmed, "Yes, this is the private forge of the Emil family." Iso turned around and immediately saw Marius, who was standing right there. For a moment he was struck by the view. Marius looked even more distinct in such a place. The noble side shone through everything. Marius explained that they make and repair weapons here for their soldiers. And then he finally greeted Iso after such a long absence. Iso responded to the greeting, and then, looking closely, recognized the short sword that Marius was carrying. There was little time for the meeting. Marius apologized for the sudden summons and immediately got to the point. He made a demand. Iso must forge a sword for him and make it the best blade that could possibly exist. Iso did not object but set a condition. Name the reason or else you won't move from this spot. Then Marius explained what the problem was. The Emil family had a family sword and a few days ago it was stolen. Marius asked if Iso understood what was happening in the Emil household. Iso confirmed. He had long heard about it from Diana, Marius' younger sister. Marius summarized. Given the circumstances of the theft, it was most likely an inside job, and he firmly knew that the family sword was taken by none other than his brother Coral. Iso immediately asked what forging the sword had to do with it. Marius laid out the plan as he saw it himself. Coral probably wanted to show that the one who so carelessly lost the family relic was not worthy to inherit the house. At first, he will pretend as if he is helping to search for the lost blade. But as soon as the right moment appears, he will stage its discovery himself and use it to look the most worthy. For Iso, this plan was so transparent that it was almost insulting, and this is exactly where he came into play. Marius explained, there is no time. The real sword must be taken from Coral. Since everything has gone so far, they will have to switch to another strategy. They plan to pass off the stolen family relic as a fake, and this thought suddenly threw Iso off track. The sword, Marius said it directly. He wanted Iso to forge a new family sword for the Emil house, and only then would the whole true meaning fall into place. The sword forged by Iso would become the new treasure of the Emil lineage, passed down from generation to generation. Iso quietly pondered, does Marius even understand what he is asking? Marius clarified his thoughts and said very clearly, although the sword is called a family relic, it is not a divine artifact nor an elven work, it is simply steel. Long ago, the king gave it to the Amal family when their lands were recognized as a county, and it is said that it was forged by one of the most outstanding blacksmiths of that time. Iso fell silent, weighing the request. At that very second, Camillo interrupted the conversation and sharply said, he had already seen the sword that Iso forged for Helen. In his eyes, such a level was only within the power of a few human masters. So if Iso really managed to make a blade of that caliber, he would have nothing to fear. But Iso had one serious flaw. He had never seen the real family sword, and if he took a substitute at random, the new blade would definitely look different, and this difference could expose the whole plan. Marius explained, the ancestral sword is drawn only for private ceremonies, and on other days it is almost never shown. In the family records, only the history was left, without detailed descriptions of the form or structure, so he believed that external differences were unlikely to become a serious problem. Iso paused for a moment, carefully weighing everything down to the smallest details. So he agreed to the request. Marius was glowing with excitement and immediately thanked him. But Iso stopped him right on the spot. He told Marius that there was no need to be so formal. He wanted him to speak as easily as during their first meeting in the city, but now the words sounded constrained and uncertain. Marius, even holding himself with dignity, could not just agree. It was unthinkable for him to humiliate the man who was about to save his family. Iso responded just as directly. Thanks to Marius from the very beginning, he was able to conduct business in the city without any problems. It was just a gesture in return. Mario fell silent for a moment, pondering. If another option is offered, the completion of this task by ISO will be considered fulfilled. From then on they will be considered equals, and excessive politeness between them will not be required. Izu just saw it and immediately smiled and agreed. Marius was delighted, so he decided it was better to stop there. Iso quietly thought, was it really appropriate for the blacksmith to talk so freely with the man standing next in line to become a count? And at least it was much better than those stiff, colorless conversations between them. Then Marius returned to the real problem. If they fall under suspicion and exposure becomes inevitable, there is only one simple way out: to compare the swords face to face. And if the forged blade loses to the real one, the very same sword, if only one, everyone would instantly understand which one the king gave. Iso quietly smiled to himself, exactly the smile expected from someone raised as the heir of a noble family. Marius, reminded time was short and asked to start at least once. Iso did not hesitate for a moment, immediately agreed. Iso focused, looked inside and gathered all his strength. In his thoughts, he was preparing not for a trifle. In a moment he had to do Marius a favor that could last a lifetime. The Emil family forge was not adapted for magic, so Iso had to light the furnace himself. But the thing was not only in the magic embedded in it. Iso also knew the basics of real blacksmith work. He knew what to do. First he struck the iron on the anvil. Metal, after repeated strikes, it slowly heated up to red. Then he put it together with barley in the bark and set it on fire. Next, charcoal was poured onto the heat. Even the bellows here were manual, so he pumped them himself to make the flame come alive again. As soon as the heat subsided, Iso decided that it was possible to handle this. Usually he relied on his magical bellows and magical fiery hearth, so now he finally realized. These tools allow him to fully devote himself to the craft. Yet he quickly settled in. From the prepared materials he chose the neatest iron plate and decisively began the real work. His eyes sharpened and the hammering immediately thundered. As the rhythm continued, Iso felt something was slightly wrong with himself. What he held in his hands felt different than usual. Maybe it was the other hammer. For a moment he squinted, or maybe he should have taken his own. But he brushed off that thought. This was a special order, a blade meant to bear a weight incomparably greater than steel alone. He had to concentrate more than ever, so he sharpened his attention to details. Next, when the shape of the long sword was ready, he took on the hardening and strengthening of the steel. Mastery, next polishing, then sharpening. Finally, the sword was ready. Iso glanced down at the finished blade, and instead of relief, a heavy, far from joyful shadow fell on his face. He felt only dissatisfaction. There was something wrong with this, and it sharply stood out against the background of his usual work. While everything was going on, Samia quietly fiddled with her own affairs in the workshop, silently waiting for Iso to return. When the silence dragged on, a memory suddenly surfaced in her head. How Iso said he would return soon and how he relied on everyone. She recalled his words. Once more he asked to return home alive and intact. This tiny memory lingered in her mind longer than she had hoped. It was clear. Samia was clearly worried. Iso was nearby and Reich calmly cut in. There was no need to worry, Iso would be fine. As soon as the voice sounded, Samia was struck. As if by an electric shock, she was instantly frightened. She immediately waved it off. In a firm tone she assured that she was not worried at all and began to explain. But Diana gently intervened. It was perfectly natural for Samia to be worried. And she also apologized for dragging them into her family's problems. It was impossible to hide the guilt in her heart. Samia immediately sharply interrupted and objected. She was not worried about Diana or anyone else. Yet she admitted, Diana's family was clearly going through hard times. Samia added that although she was not very knowledgeable about human affairs, one thing she knew for sure: these people were extremely important to Diana. As soon as those words sounded in the room, tears flashed in Diana's eyes. Samia and Reich, without wasting a second, approached closer and quietly, each in her own way, tried to calm her. The warm breath of the moment pierced the troubled times. Meanwhile, Iso sat in the forge and was deeply lost in thought. He could not understand why his work suddenly felt different than usual. As if something was pressing on him from outside, although he worked the same as always and did not slack off, so this oddity just did not make sense to him. Soon Camillo returned with food for Iso and asked if he had already eaten everything. Iso looked intently at the sword he had forged himself, as if searching for an answer in it. Camillo suddenly fell silent and froze in thought. Could something have gone wrong? Because on the outside the blade seemed to him absolutely undamaged. Iso decided to check everything. He took the sword and cut several vegetables. And for Camillo, the result looked simply incredibly clear. But Iso remained dissatisfied. For him, this was by no means a premium level. Then he took out a knife for comparison and was about to cut another portion of vegetables. The blade passed smoothly and cleanly, almost without any resistance. That's all. Camilla froze in surprise. Then ISO concluded, as expected, something was wrong. Camillo noted in surprise. The knife didn't twitch at all while he was cutting, and Iso just smiled and explained that this was the true sharpness of the products he usually makes. Hearing this, Camillo finally understood what Iso had hinted at earlier. What lay before him was clearly not the work of an amateur. Iso understood that's how it should be, so he decided to try again. Then Camillo asked directly what Iso intended to do with this blade. Iso said in an indifferent tone, "If Camillo wants it, let him take it," and Camillo instantly lit up with joy, but it quickly faded as soon as Iso added that he would give it away for pennies. And then Camillo had to admit Iso was truly a tough blade master. Without any pause, Iso threw himself into work and very soon assembled 2 new prototypes. Both looked like first-class products. But the difference between them was immediately visible. He examined each carefully, as if it were a verdict that could still be changed. The first blade shone brighter than the second. He did exactly that without unnecessary hesitation. A single detail immediately caught his eye, and he was already looking for a way to evoke the same spark in his products. But later he suddenly realized the answer was not in that. Without hesitation, he threw the blade back into the fire and pulled it out again. He chopped the knife's metal into small pieces like bullets, wrapped them in thin fabric, and sprinkled straw ash on top. Then he continuously heated everything in the flame until those parts merged into one solid piece of metal. If there was not enough material for 2 blades, the answer was simple. He only had to add more. And when he had to add, he chose raw metal as even and clean as possible. After that, he began assembling. He heated the steel until it fused into one whole, flattened the lump again. Each time he repeated the same folding motion, again and again, and only after doing it 15 times did the results finally begin to appear. He wove magic, sharpened his senses, and calmed his nerves so while he stretched the material, the surface remained smooth and perfectly clean. While Izan was working, he suddenly realized something important. That strange discomfort that appeared during the blows on the metal disappeared. Then the rhythm returned, and very soon the product was ready. But there was still one thing left. For it to become a true family treasure, Iso had to properly decorate it. According to Marius, this sword was an extraordinarily valuable treasure, a family relic from the founder of the Emile line and part of their history. Not that Iso sought to encourage the making of fake family relics. On the contrary, he knew well, there was no room for error here. Iso aimed to forge a strong item, one that could stand alongside the original, and then everything depended on who would hold it in their hands. This would be a sword passed down from generation to generation, so, at the very least, it had to be worthy to stand alongside such a name. Iso carefully watched to ensure the blade had no warping. The honor of the family sword must not fall into disgrace. Finally, Iso noticed it was already dark outside. The forging had captivated him so much that time slipped away unnoticed. At last, the blade was ready, and all the decorations were also completed. Iso even hid on the weapon the logo of a sitting cat, a small secret sign, a quiet Easter egg. After such a long working day, he decided, enough. Without proper rest, there is no point in continuing. The sword is ready, so tomorrow it will be time to make the scabbard. The next day, Mario held the finished sword in his hands, and he froze at its appearance. For him, it was truly a beautiful weapon. Iso, barely smiling, admitted, the scabbard required a lot of time, but he still managed to finish it on time. Without wasting a second, Mariah stepped into the sword stance and began wildly spinning the blade. Iso watched with quiet pride, and Camillo stood stunned. After all, it was the first time he saw the sword being used for real. Iso did not look away. The movement strangely resembled Diana's style. He noticed it immediately. After which he turned to Marius and asked how the sword felt. Marius replied that it was incredible. For him, it was the best sword he had ever held. Iso without hesitation declared, this is the best sword he can offer at all, so of course, it is simply wonderful. Then Marius noted that this weapon would be a perfect forgery of the family relic. After that, Marius firmly shook Iso's hand, sincerely thanked him, and asked Iso to rest that day, promising to come the next morning to take him. Iso quietly flashed through his thoughts. Could this mean that he would finally be taken back home tomorrow? And the next day, everything went completely differently. The Amal brothers sat opposite each other at the family table. Iso stood next to Marius, and suddenly everything came together. Marius had no intention of taking him home at all. That morning he woke up too early, collected, as if he had long been waiting for the moment to set off. But as soon as he came to, Marius appeared out of nowhere with several young ladies. Their hands quickly undressed Iso, then dressed him appropriately for the event. And before he could understand what was happening, he was already brought here in that appearance. The honored man announced that he was asked to act as a judge in this case. Sitting in the judge's seat, he proclaimed, Carol found the stolen family sword. The stern old man, Duke Menzel. He was called a close friend of the former head of the Emil family, and his mere presence compressed the air in the room. Carol stepped forward and proudly declared, the day before he managed to find the sword near the border. Iso immediately recognized him. Coral is the brother of Marius and Diana, the same man who dreamed of becoming the next head of the family. Then Duke Menzel said, if this issue were truly resolved, Marius would have been agreed upon immediately as the new head of the Emil family. So Carol sharply objected without hesitation. The family relic was stolen while his brother Marius did nothing, and this failure was proof that Marius was unworthy to lead the family. Iso felt the air in the room tense to the limit. The confrontation had truly begun. Duke Menzel admitted. There was a valid argument in Coral's words, and then Marius asked for permission to speak on the matter. Duke Menzel allowed him to continue, and Marius calmly, without unnecessary movements, laid everything out clearly. He was not guilty of anything. Stolen family relic turned out to be a fake. Coral clearly twitched at this statement. Then Marius took out another sword and declared that it was the true treasure. Carol immediately lost his composure and insisted that it was impossible, and Duke Menzel firmly ordered him to calm down. After that, the Duke turned to Marius and asked how anyone could believe that this sword was genuine at all. In response, Marius pulled out a letter. Pulling out and handing over the paper, he explained, their father had left it intentionally. According to Marius, the family always appeared at ceremonies and public events displaying a fake sword, while the real family relic was kept elsewhere and carefully hidden. Carol froze, swallowing the truth. Marius then handed the letter to Duke Mansell and simply revealed its content. When the country is engulfed in crisis, the rightful heir must take the family relic and stand against this disaster. Reviewing the letter, Duke Menzel instantly recognized the handwriting. It was that of the former Count Emile. Carol, besides him, looked deeply disappointed. Iso quietly watched the scene and realized everything went as it should. Then he glanced at Camillo. He just winked in response. Iso did not want Camillo to wink at him at all, but as soon as he realized, here first of all, Camillo's work was involved. Later, Marius said that their older brother ran away from the family even before the truth became known. He admitted they met for the second time only on that recent day. After that, Marius apologized to Carol, saying he was late and didn't manage to explain everything. Then Duke Menzel asked Carol if he had any objections left. If they did not exist, he would say this directly to the king himself. Coral stood, trembling with rage and stubbornly repeating that he could not believe. The sword he had found could not be a fake. Iso moment by moment realized. Behind this reaction stands Corella's plan to compare and test the blade that Iso made against the original. As soon as Iso realized this, Marius accepted the challenge and resolutely declared that he would prove it to Carol. Then Marius turned to Duke Mancella and asked him to give him the garden for a few minutes. The Duke calmly agreed without unnecessary words. Later, outside in the garden of the estate, the man clenched his teeth and prepared to test his strength with the spear against opposite two swords while everyone watched intently. But only Moral struck the spear against the sword forged by Iso, and that very spear immediately shattered into pieces, and Duke Menzel instantly recognized. Before him was the sword that the king once gifted to the Amal family, and it bore not a single scratch. Before them stood a weapon that contained both beauty and power, and Moral insisted, such a result is laughable. But Duke Menzel did not flinch. Not for a moment did he waver. He calmly announced that it was time to test Carol's sword as well. But before this could happen, Maria stepped forward and said, no need. He raised the sword and decisively lowered it down. A dull, clear strike on Carol's blade, and the entire swing hit the target. Carol's sword shattered into pieces. Marius confidently declared that he vouched for the strength, durability, and sharpness. His sword was genuine. Duke Menzel immediately dismissed any doubts and recognized his right to be the very sword that should dominate the battlefield. When Carol heard this, he became even angrier. The Duke solemnly declared that there would be no more problems in this matter. The Amal family's inheritance would be distributed according to the rules, and he himself would report the outcome to His Majesty. At these words, Marius barely allowed himself a tiny victorious smile. Then Duke Menzel asked, are both parties satisfied? But Carol suddenly fell silent. For a moment, the entire garden froze. And in just a few seconds, he roared wildly and rushed straight at Marius with a dagger in his hand. Marius was already ready. With a lightning-fast move, he struck Carol with his sword. Carol screamed piercingly in pain, but Marius did not even flinch. Soon Marius fell to his knees before Duke Menzel and sincerely apologized for dirtying his garden. He was ready to accept any punishment, but Duke Menzel said there was no need for that. Instead, Duke Menzel passed a sentence. Marius would be punished by avenging that thief and with his own beautiful swords. After that, Duke Menzel addressed him as Lord Marius. Iso heard the word Lord and quietly thought, could it be that Marius was already recognized as the new count? Then Duke Menzel announced that this was the end, and it was time for them to return inside. Marius cast a brief glance at his brother Carol, and for a moment tears shimmered in his eyes. He immediately looked away and headed back to the estate. Meanwhile, Maria confidently took the place of the new head of the Emile family. Lord Menzel carefully arranged everything so that the incident caused by Carol would never come to light. After that, Marius and Lord Menzel plunged into a conversation about the family's future path and what awaited them. No one was told about Carol's death. On the contrary, rumors were spread that he had set off on a journey around the world and was secretly helping Marius from afar. At the same time, his body was silently taken out and buried just as secretly. When all those matters finally quieted down, Iso was suddenly overwhelmed with thoughts about Diana. In Emile's mansion behind Iso's back, two maids quietly giggled. He noticed this and, unable to hold back, sharply asked what exactly had amused them so much. One of the maids nodded and remarked, "It seems Iso really loved the clothes he used to wear." Iso waved it off, saying he was just an ordinary old man from a small town, and besides, honestly, the clothes he wore now fit him much better and even made him look cooler. His friends nodded happily and immediately agreed. Then Camillo entered the room and sincerely praised Iso for the good work he had done there. Iso replied that after everything he had seen, he now definitely knew that the noble life was not for him. And saying this, as if casually, he showed his outfit. Marius and Camillo both agreed with smiles. Marius sincerely wanted to thank both Camillo and Iso honestly, without any pretension, for helping him get through all of this. Camillo waved it off, saying it was a trifle and stated that he had done nothing special. Marius confessed he could not offer them a great reward because they already knew about his current situation. But if there was at least something he could truly repay with, he would very much like to know about it. Camillo spoke first. While Marius was talking to him, everything was steady. The business with the nobleman covered a lot, even more than it seemed. Then Marius turned to Iso and asked what he wanted. Iso said he wanted to learn about rare ore. Marius asked again if it was about something rare like mithril, and Iso confirmed. Marius promised. As soon as Iso needed these materials, it would be enough to pass the word through Camillo, and Marius would do everything he could. Then Marius handed Camillo some item, and insisted that he accept it without any objections. Iso did not want to take anything at all, but Marius's eyes were strangely convincing, so in the end, he gave in and agreed. This, Marius bit him again with his fangs. They left the Emile family estate with a plan to return Diana and celebrate Maria's accession to the position of the new count, while Ice finally headed back to the Black Forest. The forest, after saying goodbye to Camillo, Iso entered the night forest alone and set off home. Even before his arrival, Samia already felt Iso was returning. Nizo saw this and he was far from home only for a very short time, but he missed it more than he expected from himself. As soon as he approached, Samia, Reich, and Diana came out to meet him. Samia joyfully shouted that he had finally returned. Reich also greeted him, and Diana came closer and warmly said that she was very pleased to see him at home. Later, Iso will tell Diana what happened to Carol, and it was then that sadness overwhelmed her. Memories like a wave rolled over her again. Diana remembered. Once Carol was kind to everyone when she was very little. He played with her, treated her father kindly, and Leon, and of course Marius. She was trembling with sobs. She could not believe that everything had come to this. The ancestral sword of the Amal family, the very one forged by Iso, turned out to be the weapon that took Carol's life. After a long cry, Diana choked with emotion and apologized for shedding so many tears. Iso quietly told her not to worry. He believed that no one could hold back tears upon learning of a brother's death, especially a brother with whom one once got along. And whatever a person did in life, with the arrival of death, all that falls away. And Iso reminded Diana that her brother's death was being concealed, so she must cry now while she still can before returning to the estate. He asked her to give in fully to grief. Diana quietly thanked him. After that, Iso promised. The next morning he would take Diana to the estate because he himself was going to a banquet. Rake quickly realized Iso would be gone again for 2 or 3 days. Rake admitted that Rake was right and apologized to her for leaving again. Rake pretended to be indifferent, but quickly, without unnecessary ceremonies, made it clear. This was really important for Samia, and as soon as those words were spoken, Samia flared up with anger at Rake for such bluntness. But in a moment Diana laughed at their brief quarrel, and Iso quietly rejoiced, hearing and seeing her laughter. The next day they arrived at the estate. Iso informed Lady Diana they were already there. Diana reacted as if he spoke too formally, but her gaze immediately jumped further. She saw her brother Marius, who was waiting for her. And then she suddenly rushed straight to him and immediately hugged him tightly. Iso looked around and noticed. This time he was able to clearly see the outside world, and here gathered many different races. People of all skin tones, dwarves, beast folk, and even lizard folk. Iso had never seen a lizard folk before. Camillo then noticed a little one wandering nearby and explained. The massive gates at the city entrance are proof of peace with the giant tribe, built by the old king long ago. Iso received these words with cool, restrained curiosity. Then Iso wondered, are there elves here? Camillo explained that elves usually live by themselves, so they rarely leave their forests. Usually they appeared only rarely for supplies, so seeing them nearby was a true rarity. Soon Marius approached and apologized for making them wait. Everything spun wildly. Marius soon had an audience with the king and also had to prepare a report on the succession, and Iso noticed that he was extremely tired. In the mansion, Iso finally relaxed and thought that by tomorrow he would have nothing more to do when someone knocked on the door. At the threshold stood a servant and announced, "Lady Diana calls, let Iso come to the garden as soon as he gets there." In the garden, Diana was already waiting, sword in hand, gaze focused and firm. Iso thought for a moment whether it was really worth dragging this out even here. But Diana had already decided everything. She was sure this could be their last training, so not a second could be wasted. The sparring flared up immediately. Diana was the first to rush forward and without any hesitation delivered a shooting strike, and Iso, as always, reacted instantly, took a defensive stance and blocked the attack. The clashes flared again and again until time stretched under the ringing of iron, and only then did Diana and Iso freeze, breathing heavily from exhaustion. Diana sharply ordered Iso to fight her for real. She had already noticed that he only parried blows and never pressed her. And Iso still barely believed what he heard, hesitated whether she was really that serious. Diana said nothing unnecessary, a determined look. Iso immediately nodded. There would be one last round, so they prepared again. But at that very moment, Iso sharply thrust his training sword right at Diana's face. It was not the force but the speed that stunned her. Hers, she didn't even manage to see this movement. Iso told Diana that over the past few days her skills have grown incredibly, and that with diligent training she will be able to aim as high as she wishes. Diana was glowing. She smiled, thanked him sincerely without any hesitation. Iso quietly thought that maybe this would be the last time he would ever see her smile. Later, Marius, walking alongside Diana, set off with the report literally right before His Majesty. Finally, the time had come to officially become Count Emile. Animal, shortly after this, the hastily prepared banquet unfolded in all its splendor. During the celebration, Marius raised a toast to the future prosperity of the Emile family and to the unchanging bond that holds them with everyone present. The hall erupted with loud applause and cries of joy. While everyone was rejoicing, Iso stood aside calmly thinking about what dishes he could prepare, how much he wished Samia and Wright would taste them. He was lost in his own thoughts for a moment until Diana came up and remarked how well the outfit suited her. Iso replied that his shoulders were painfully cramped in it. Then Iso told Diana that she was truly wonderful in her red dress, and that calling her the Rose of the family was absolutely appropriate. Diana instantly blushed and reacted as if he was flattering her too much. Iso made it clear. He said it sincerely, without any pretense. He was truly struck by the thought that he would see Diana for the last time, and she just giggled and acted as if she didn't believe it. While they stood together in that warm moment, two men suddenly approached them and called Diana. They just asked her to join them just like that, without any extra explanations. Because of this, Iso was pushed aside. After that, he no longer had the chance to exchange even a word with Diana, and before he could realize it, the banquet was already over. Outside, when everyone was already getting ready to leave, Iso said to Marius, "Become a good lord." He quietly looked back. Was Diana standing nearby somewhere? But he was already expecting it, the count's daughter, so she would be busy. Marius then drew a fake sword. He said that he had already been loaded into the wagon, and Iso is going to repair it. But Iso wanted so much to understand what Mari was going to do with this thing. He awkwardly asked if it would need to be returned after the repair. But Marius cut him off with a single no, and Iso can blame everything on him. Marius explained, due to the current circumstances, they could not rely on chance or anyone's purely personal decision. Iso understands and agrees he will take good care of it. And then Marius added that there was one more thing he wanted Iso to look after. It was lying inside that very box, and he left it to Iso just after that they set off. Soon after, some time passed on the road. Finally, they reached the entrance to the forest. Iso reminded him to take his luggage from behind that box. Iso approached, opened the box, and finally looked inside. As soon as the lid was removed, he froze both from surprise and pure shock. Inside someone was, and he could not make himself believe, it was Diana herself. Long hidden in a box, she raised her gaze to him at that very moment and joyfully showed, "I'm here." As soon as Diana appeared in the workshop, the usual days in Iso's workshop passed calmly, with smiles, with lively moments without unnecessary pauses. And the biggest change began when they built a new room for the newest family member. They worked side by side for almost a week, putting their soul into every detail to complete everything. After some time, the work finally came to an end, and everyone burst out with joyful exclamations, admiring the finished room. Reich smiled and joyfully said that now, with the new room ready, they finally feel like a real family. For now, Diana quietly asked, "Take care of me once more," and at the same time, admitted how fun it was for her to create something together just like that. Iso then asked if Diana thought she could help again whenever work appeared in the future. Diana answered without any hesitation, "Of course I can." She also added that if she couldn't, she would never have come here. As soon as Iso heard this, he handed her something. Diana's eyes suddenly widened with surprise as soon as she recognized the item in his hands. It was her custom-made knife, exactly the same as the others. Now it belonged to her, so she could defend herself. Samia explained, "It is like proof, a sign that someone has already become part of the family." Diana smiled softly, quietly and gratefully accepting this gesture. Meanwhile, Iso reminded her. She already knew how sharp the blade was, so it should be handled with extreme care. Diana nodded. There was no point in arguing and involuntarily admired how beautiful it looked. Then Iso came up with another idea. To bring Diana's luggage inside, the work for today was already finished. And later that night, everyone finally fell asleep. The next day they visited Camillo's shop. Camillo warmly greeted the attractive young man standing right in front of him. This time he arrived with 3 women accompanying him. Diana sincerely apologized to Camillo for causing him trouble every time they visited. Looking around, Iso noted with surprise, there were significantly more workers now than before. Camillo, with a spark in his voice, said that thanks to Iso, business was going wonderfully. After the recent dealings with the Count's family, he managed to open a small shop in the capital, and the number of employees immediately increased noticeably. And Iso immediately understood. This was business expansion, and for him, truly joyful news. Then Camillo again turned the conversation to the real reason Iso had come here initially. He was looking for another ore, and Iso immediately confirmed this. Then Camillo announced that they had received a small tip from His Excellency. A batch of Poitakara had already arrived from the north and was somewhere in the city. As soon as Iso heard this name, one word instantly flashed in his mind: mithril. It was a hurricane, the very same legendary metal. In this world, such a rare raw material could only be obtained in the north, so Camillo told Iso, if he wanted, let him bring some. Iso did not waste time. Immediately, without any hesitation, he agreed to the offer. When the conversation finally ended, Iso and the others eventually headed away. After a few minutes, they stopped to rest and had lunch in a cozy corner. During the break, Iso said that he had left Smith in the care of 2 others, especially Reich, and sincerely thanked her. Thanks to her efforts that day, sales were excellent, so the goods did not run out. Iso was truly grateful to Reich for handling everything so well. Reich smiled and admitted that she also enjoyed listening to Iso and Camillo's stories about everything Iso had achieved in the capital. And Diana added that she had already heard these stories from her brother. To Iso, the capital looked much livelier than the city where they now lived. Against the backdrop of the eternal hustle and tightness of the capital, everything here looked quiet and peaceful. Looking around, Iso noticed a few people nearby and wondered if they were travelers. For now, he quietly replayed in his mind his second life in this world. He thought that he could simply forge like an old blacksmith, but still understood if he got another amazing cheating power, he would probably wander the world like those adventurers. Suddenly, Samia asked if Iso had ever planned to set out on a journey, and this question threw him off balance. Iso immediately denied it and explained that the only reason he went there was special circumstances. After everything he had been through, he definitely did not want to go through the same experience again. But Samia still did not look convinced. Catching the meaning of his answer, Isel quietly stepped aside. Her own reaction embarrassed her, and Isel could not understand what had happened to Samia and Reich lately. Reich answered quietly, "The reason is in him." Diana agreed with Reich and honestly said what everyone felt. It seemed to them that Iso might simply disappear one day without a trace. She added that Samia probably asked that question because she was also afraid. As soon as she finished speaking, Iso quietly fell silent. Deep down, he understood why they clung to these thoughts. After all, he really came from another world, however. Now everything looked completely different. In a moment, Iso calmed the three women and promised he would not leave until he informed his family. As soon as those words left his mouth, the air around them suddenly became clearer. Later, Izo noticed. Samia was thoughtfully looking into the distance, and unable to resist curiosity, he asked what had happened. Samia said that the air smelled like rain, and looking at the direction of the wind, added, she felt it would not let go for a long time. Then Iso asked for how long at least as she imagined it herself. Samia admitted she did not know exactly but was sure it would not last longer than a week. Iso raised his eyes to the sky and quietly thought, the rain is unlikely to last more than 3 days, so we must hurry collect water from the stream while there is a chance. Time passed and finally the rain began. As Sumia predicted, everything probably started around midnight. The work for the day was simple: replenish the supplies of sheet metal made of iron, because they had already used too much of it. Diana watched their actions with surprise until she noticed that they were making the sheet metal themselves. And then it finally became clear to her why their weapons and equipment were so strong. Samia without any hesitation said she was already stronger than ordinary people. The next day the rain still did not stop, so while it poured outside without ceasing, Iso put everyone to work on making basic models. Looking closely at a piece of metal, he quietly noted that the quality was good. So he decided to forge himself a new knife. The one left from the forging times in the capital was already quite worn out. Nearby, 3 women silently watched his work until he finally finished. Iso silently stared at the finished knife in his hand. Then Reich approached him and watched excitedly as serious Iso changed every time she worked. In her gaze, the finished knife looked incredibly beautiful. Diana also agreed. Although she did not see the craft as deeply as Reich, she still understood the main thing: the knife was simply incredible. Reich admitted that she did not fully understand everything, but was still impressed. Iso simply sincerely thanked for the compliment. These words really made him happy. Then Iso explained that he would never have dared to do such a thing in the capital. What she heard stunned Reich, and she sharply asked if it was really true. Iso confirmed without hesitation. He said that in the capital there was no choice. He had to melt the knife together with the metal, mix everything, and hammer it out just to make it work at all. But despite everything, there were no problems. He forged high-quality swords and quietly pondered in his mind whether something unusual was truly hidden in this forge. But the whole trouble was that now he could not take a single step to verify his theory. Iso did not intend to stay here long, so he saw nothing terrible. However, deep down he knew, peace does not last forever, and sooner or later the truth will have to be brought out. The rain did not give up for several more days. They tested new products and waited until it finally dawned. And so, as always, the rainy day quietly passed by. Finally, the dark clouds receded, and for the first time in several days the stars shone again. The next morning Samia woke up delighted. The sun had indeed returned. Reich happily concluded now they could finally wash the laundry. Meanwhile, Diana admitted that she was already starting to worry. If the rain continued any longer, mold would begin to appear everywhere. Samia then announced, as soon as she finishes washing, she will go hunting. Iso immediately noticed that day Samia was unusually cheerful. Reich casually explained that perhaps that was why she was happy. Her arrows had finally been replenished. Hearing this, Iso barely smiled and admitted that he himself was glad they really liked these arrows. Samia truly glowed with happiness more than usual. Then Reich jokingly said that it was just girlish feelings, a maiden's heart. Later, Iso and Reich worked side by side, forging the sword together. But listening carefully, Iso suddenly noticed. The strikes of the 2 hammers on the forge sounded strange to him, almost like a musical flourish, and their rhythm was already forming a melody. Quietly, Iso wondered, does Reich think the same thing? Some time passed. Iso suggested having dinner after work, and Reich immediately agreed. That evening dinner was finally served, and they both quietly thanked for the food before sitting down and eating together. While they were eating, Iso suddenly asked Reich if she would sometimes like to go outside like Samia and Diana. Reich looked at him embarrassed and asked why he was even asking that. Iso explained, sometimes I go into town or go wash, but otherwise I live almost all the time in the forge. Reich admitted to say that she really did not want to go outside would be untrue. As soon as these words flew out, she immediately clarified that gnomes are like that. Mother could indeed watching and learning right at the master's work. It was a real pleasure for her. Iso nodded quietly. He understood everything and accepted her answer. And Reich after that thanked him for caring about her. Later, Iso finally finished working on the sword and decided, that's enough for today. At that very moment, there was such a loud knock on the door that everyone involuntarily turned and paid attention to it. A loud shout from the corridor tore the silence. Iso, are you here? Iso immediately recognized whose voice it was. He responded and just as quickly opened the door. Helen stood on the threshold. She greeted him after such a long separation. Iso sincerely welcomed her and invited her inside. While the two of them were drinking tea, Iso could not resist and spoke first. He asked Helen if her blade was not damaged, maybe something similar had happened to it. Helen only shook her head and explained. She was going to a battlefield far from here, so she asked him to put the weapons in order and carefully inspect them before departure. Then she handed him the sword, and Iso quietly began to check the blade. Iso carefully examined the blade and asked if she used it often. Helen replied that she had trained diligently for about a week, then mostly used it against thieves and occasionally practiced strikes on logs. Glancing at the weapon, Iso said, "There are no serious visible damages, but traces still remain." At the same time, Iso quietly pondered. How much strength Helen must have spent in battle to load his personally forged sword like that. Helen admitted, the blade turned out to be better than she imagined. It cut incredibly easily and saved her life more than once. Hearing this, Iso quietly said he was glad. But Helen admitted once again, no matter how much she thanked him, she still felt it was not enough. Yet despite everything, she wanted to say it sincerely and thanked Iso once more. Iso answered simply, "It is his job, so he will do it." Then they shook hands, but Helen's grip was so strong that Iso even felt pain. After the inspection, Iso said, the sword is still good enough to use for 6 months, but he was still going to carefully repair and tune it. And Helen only wished him luck. Then Iso asked her to wait a little while he fixed everything. But Helen had one specific request. She asked to be allowed to observe the repair up close. Iso replied that he was not against it at all. As soon as she heard this, Helen immediately rejoiced and could not hold back. And finally, out of excitement, she simply slapped him on the back. They soon began the repairs. Meanwhile, Reich and Helen stood side by side and silently watched as he worked. Iso carefully examined every part of the blade and unhurriedly, skillfully straightened all visible distortions. Soon the work was completed. He returned Helen's sword and asked her to test it herself. Helen immediately swung the blade several times with broad strokes. She exclaimed right away that it was incredible. The sword now felt just as perfect as on the day she first received it. Hearing this, Iso praised Helen and emphasized how impressive it was that she noticed even such small changes, those he had only slightly adjusted. After that, Iso asked if there were any remaining problems with the blade. Helen immediately said that everything felt completely normal. Then Iso asked if Helen wanted him to also replace the leather wrapping on the handle, but she refused. She had adjusted it herself so the grip fit confidently in her hands. Iso only nodded in response and immediately began repairing his second blade. While he worked, Helen quietly watched without looking away, following every movement. When the work was nearing completion, Iso asked if she really enjoyed watching such craftsmanship. Helen honestly replied that she did. Every time she looked closely at his work, it seemed to her as if she herself had become a craftswoman. Later, she admitted, her father once made harnesses, so she grew up watching how various things came to life by his hands. But for various reasons, she eventually had to leave her home, and Iso became interested as soon as he learned that her father was a saddler. And this job also seemed incredibly fascinating to him. Suddenly, Helen asked if he was curious why she had left home at all. Iso calmly replied that he usually does not ask women about their past. Helen clarified whether anything bad had ever happened to Iso because he listens to women about their past. Iso also calmly said, maybe, but immediately added that if Helen wants to talk more about food, he would gladly listen to her as much as she wants. Hearing this, Helen just quietly smiled. Iso announced that the repair was finished and was already reaching to sharpen the blade, but at that very moment a voice sounded, "I have returned home." As soon as Helen caught these words, her eyes instantly widened with surprise. Soon Samia greeted Helen and asked how she had been feeling lately. At the same moment, Diana also froze seeing her there. Unable to hold back, Diana directly asked if it was true that she was Helen, the very one known as Lightning Blade. Helen calmly, without any hesitation, confirmed it. As soon as she heard this, Diana was speechless from shock. Then Iso said to Helen, instead of payment for the repair, he wants her to train sparring with Diana. Helen asked again if such an arrangement really suited him, and Iso instantly assured, yes. While they train, he will finish sharpening the second blade. Helen agreed without hesitation and confidently asked to take Diana's training into her own hands, immediately adding, for safety, they would use wooden swords. Diana genuinely beamed with happiness and immediately thanked Helen for agreeing after all. Helen noticed that Diana was going to fight with only one sword and without hesitation decided she would also take only one. While Iso was focused on sharpening the blade, nearby Helen and Diana had already started sparring. Samia silently stood aside and watched how the fight unfolded. After some time, Iso finally finished sharpening the weapon, and almost simultaneously Reich noticed. It seemed Helen and Diana had also stopped sparring. Diana looked exhausted, her legs barely trembling. She was gathering strength to finally catch her breath. Meanwhile, Helen, on the contrary, looked full of energy as if she was not exerting herself at all. Then Iso asked Helen how Diana had managed. Helen, without hiding, said, Diana had a very strong foundation, but added that her fighting style seemed a bit too clean and proper. Iso immediately understood what was meant. Diana's fencing looked too simple, so she would probably have a hard time standing against mercenaries who had experience and had survived for years on real battlefields. Yet Iso still believed Diana was already stronger than those royal knights he had fought before. Helendon asked if Iso himself had personally trained Diana, and Iso confirmed, yes. Hearing this, Helen immediately put everything together. She explained that Diana's feints and movements were very similar to Iso's style, so because of familiarity, it was easy for her to handle them. Iso was genuinely impressed by how Helen was able to recall the fighting habits and movements of a person with whom she had crossed blades only once. Meanwhile, Diana suddenly asked Daso, is it true that he fought with Helen just 15 minutes ago? Iso confirmed without unnecessary worry and honestly admitted, holding two swords at the same time is really incredibly difficult. Hearing this, Diana finally realized, in this world there are still people much stronger than her. And just then Helen said, come on, I will also measure my strength against Iso. But Iso immediately refused. Jokingly, he said that he was just a simple blacksmith, so he could by no means compare to such a true mercenary like her. It was already dusk, so Iso suggested Helen spend the night here. It would be too dangerous to sneak through the forest at night. Helen sincerely thanked Iso for the permission, and he replied that tomorrow they were going to the city anyway, so she could go with him. The next day they finally reached the city. As soon as Iso greeted one of the guards, he immediately recognized him and his gaze quickly slid to Helen. Cautiously, the guard asked if the woman next to him was the same one known as the Blade of Lightning, and Iso calmly confirmed that he was acquainted with her. What he heard sparked even greater curiosity in the guard. Kit directly asked Iso, who are you really? Iso calmly replied that he was just an ordinary blacksmith, and after that the whole group moved on straight to Camilo's shop. Before their arrival, Helen retreated and explained that they would meet later. Iso asked her to definitely return alive from the upcoming expedition. Later at Camilo's shop, Camilo immediately asked if Iso's newest product was a halberd, and Iso confirmed just as quickly. He said he wanted Camilo to sell this weapon to the Count for the guard based in the city. Camilo agreed to the request without any problems, and immediately let Iso know he understood everything. But he did not stop there. Camilo informed Iso that the Apoitakara shipment had not yet arrived, although another order had already come in. After that, Camilo handed Iso a piece of material. As soon as he looked at it, a look of surprise flashed on his face. It was mithril. Camilo explained that the client insisted the mithril had to be forged into a rapier. As soon as Iso heard this, he was immediately drawn in and he asked Camilo if it was possible to engrave the emblems of his workshop somewhere hidden on the finished weapon. Camilo just nodded, no problem. So the matter was finally resolved. Iso officially agreed to the request. For Iso, this became a real passion. Finally, he could work with a mineral, not just iron. Later, Iso was announced. They would immediately begin forging mithril. This also inflamed Reich. She literally shone with curiosity. She admitted that she had never seen mithril forged live, not even in her parents' smithy, so now she wanted to carefully study the entire process. Iso agreed without hesitation. Soon Iso poured mithril into the forge and got to work. Usually, simple silver would have long since melted at the temperatures required for iron processing, but mithril showed no sign of melting. Finally, Iso hit the exact temperature at which the material could be worked, and as soon as this happened, he struck the mithril with a hammer. Usually after such a blow, the metal would dent, but the mithril barely changed at all. But despite everything, Iso did not stop. He struck it again and again until after several blows he admitted that honestly it was already annoying. Reich asked if it was difficult to forge such material even with Iso's special hammer, but Iso had already noticed another problem. After 4 or 5 strikes, the temperature of the mithril sharply dropped. Iso quietly whispered that this project would bring him a lot of trouble. Hearing this, Reich replied, mithril was never a material that an ordinary blacksmith could handle. For Iso, working with mithril felt as if he was forcing himself to chew an extremely hard piece of food. Difficult, troublesome, and that was it. Everything ended there. At least he believed that the very possibility of working with mithril justified all the suffering. Compared to ordinary metals, stretching mithril to the same length took 2 to 3 times longer. It was incredibly hard and forging drained a lot of strength. But despite everything, the metal itself was surprisingly easy to work with. Peering intently at the surface, Aizo noticed there were almost no irregularities, so he could focus on stretching and not waste time correcting minor flaws. At the same time, he clearly felt how delicate the material was. Every strike required full attention and precise control, because even a moment of inattention during forging could ruin the entire process. Therefore, Aizo decided to fully use his ability to be cunning while working on the blade. Meanwhile, Samia quietly noted, the hammer's knock was a true delight. For Reich, it sounded almost like a musical instrument being played, and Diana agreed too, admitting that listening to it was strangely calming and pleasant. Later, Aizo addressed the three women and asked if they were bored watching him work for so long, especially since lunch had already passed. But all three sincerely replied, no, they were not bored at all. A little later, Aizo ordered Reich to bring the whetstone, and she, slightly surprised, asked if the mithril needed to be hardened or tempered. Aizo answered confidently that was not necessary. Mithril itself was strong and durable, so all those procedures were simply redundant. Gazing at the blade, Aizo quietly admired what incredible materials from another world they had brought to light. At the same time, he felt the ruthlessness of mithril. If you even slightly misalign or skillfully grind it, the blade would instantly go awry. That was why he kept reminding himself again and again, focus, do not lower your vigilance until the very end of the process. For now, the three women silently watched his work, not once averting their eyes. After waiting a little, Aizo announced, the blade was ready. As soon as these words sounded, Diana was immediately overwhelmed with admiration, and she quickly asked if she could personally test this weapon. And Aizo immediately dismissed her desire. Not yet, because the tang is still not properly wrapped. However, Aizo still warned, if she really wants to test the sword, she must be careful the hilt is not yet wrapped. Diana agreed without hesitation and carefully lifted the sword. As soon as Diana took the weapon in her hands, she immediately felt it fits incredibly easily in the palms. Then Aizo explained that there is an old proverb, mithril weapons are light like a feather. As soon as Diana heard this, her admiration flared even stronger, and she immediately suggested testing everything outside. Outside the workshop, Diana began to hone her strikes and sword stances as soon as the mithril blade was in her hands. Aizo quietly noted, Diana and her brother are actually very similar in many ways. At the same time, the thought about the very essence of the weapon did not leave. The weapon was created to inflict pain on people. It could take life, but it could also protect and save. A small knife or a long sword, the essence is the same, and the only real difference is in length. Aizo noticed, for Diana, probably because the weapon is so light, it became much easier to accelerate. Diana immediately agreed. The sword is incredibly light, so during a swing much less stamina is spent and the body seems to lighten as she moves. Suddenly, Samia called out to Diana and suggested using one of the nearby logs as a target. Diana agreed without any hesitation. In a moment, she carefully adjusted her stance and decisively struck forward with the mithril sword. The blade smoothly passed straight through the log without pauses, without a single moment. Diana instantly froze in shock, and at the same time Samia and Reich were no less stunned when they pulled the blade back. Diana whispered, confessing, the sword is simply incredible. Diana carefully listened to her own sensations and explained. There was almost no resistance, it seemed to her, as if she had plunged the sword into empty air, not solid wood. Hearing this, Aizo quietly remarked that the weapon seemed to work perfectly. He closely examined the blade and was convinced. No warping, no chips, everything was smooth without defects. Then Aizo encouraged Diana to try next time to plunge the sword into something harder. This time he pointed to a metal sheet, and Diana nodded in agreement again. As soon as she pushed the blade forward, the same thing happened. The mithril sword passed cleanly and without resistance through the metal just as smoothly as before. And when they later checked the blade itself, there was not even the slightest scratch on it. At that moment, Aizo quietly sank into thoughts about something truly very important. It was an ordinary kitchen knife or a hero's sword, the weapon remained the same. Only one thing mattered, how exactly it was used. It could save people or end their lives. Because of this, Aizo began F. He felt perhaps he had just created something truly audacious. Fixing his gaze on the blade, he saw his own eyes reflected in it. Old memories slowly surfaced from the depths of his memory. First, how he first handed the knife to Samia, then how he personally killed a bear, and then the moment when he took another person's life. These memories finally made Aizo realize. Even now, wherever doubt hid within him, he still hesitated whether to release such a weapon into the world or not. He did not believe that a single sword was enough to reshape the world once and for all. But on the other hand, the destructive power of the blade he forged on commission changed the conversation. After all, the blades could be made of mithril or even stronger than ordinary steel. In that case, they would destroy not only people, the scale of consequences would be much broader than ever before. A weapon that did not break or bend, with a blade that remained incomparably sharp. The cutting edge knew no bounds. Such a sword could split even solid rock, and if something stood in the way, the one who wielded it simply carved a path with the force of a single strike. Once such a weapon could even have altered the course of entire wars. Iso understood all this clearly, and at the same time felt something else. Thanks to the cheating abilities he had gained from another world, he truly had the ability to directly influence the future of this world. The world, yet Iso could not stop wondering, did he really have the right to this from the very beginning? Meanwhile, three women noticed that Iso suddenly became completely silent, and Mia gently asked if he was all right. Her voice reached Iso, but he was still drowning in his own thoughts. And honestly, those same doubts gnawed at him back when he forged the sword for Helen. But something else was more important. He had already intervened in history itself and in the ancestral relic of the Emil family. Yet Iso also realized, if he eternally hesitates over such thoughts, he will never be able to forge as he should. That is why Iso quietly made a decision for himself, to dispel as quickly as possible the doubts pressing on his heart. Iso suddenly called everyone so that they would immediately look at him. Three women did not waste a second. They just looked at him and immediately asked what happened. After a short pause, Iso admitted that he hesitated, whether he really should release this sword into the world. He explained, with improper use, this weapon can easily turn into a real disaster. The destructive power was already evident during the tests, so he could not get rid of the thought of what would happen if the sword ever ended up in the wrong hands. This thought truly frightened him, not only because of the sword itself, but also because of the future it could bring along. Iso quietly admitted, he did not know if he could really take responsibility for what this weapon might one day do. No matter how hard he tried to reason, the anxiety did not subside. He didn't even notice how those thoughts themselves slipped out of his mouth. At the same time, Iso wondered if they would now call him pathetic. Outwardly, he might have looked younger, but inside he was still a man over 40. He even had a fleeting thought. It was enough just to show his weakness, and those three women might be disappointed in him and eventually leave. But if that really happened, then maybe it meant only one thing: he himself was not up to it. But instead of awkward silence, Iso suddenly caught a quiet giggle and it embarrassed him. Later, Diana noticed. Even Iso still remains human. She confessed, since he constantly created such incredible things, everything came naturally to her, but he was indifferent to these everyday worries. Reich also agreed. For her, Iso was so extraordinary that she was sure he would never bother with such trifles. But she firmly, as if chopping, cut off. Responsibility lies with the one who uses the weapon, not with the one who forged it. She was taught exactly that from childhood, and indeed, as she said, most blacksmiths thought the same. Diana said that a weapon can be a sword that protects the country, or it can be a tool for attack. Everything is decided only by who holds it. So she directly told Iso, he does not need to bear responsibility for every possible consequence alone. Hearing this, Iso fell silent again. Samia quietly added, if the burden really weighs so heavily on him, then he will not have to carry it alone. They are family, so they can share this burden with him. Before the finale, Iso paused in silence for a moment. Finally, he barely laughed. Then he sincerely thanked each of them. As soon as this happened, the three women hugged Iso tightly and warmly encouraged him. With their support, the heavy uncertainty in his heart began to gradually recede. Finally, Iso decisively declared, now everything is fine. He said he would no longer hesitate. Clenching his fists until they hurt, Iso finally gathered his courage. He was given a second life as a creator, therefore, his role in this world was to create. He aspired to create what he loved and release his things into the world, hoping that someday they would be useful to someone. But the most important thing was different. Now he was no longer alone. His family stood beside him, supporting him. Samia noticed that Iso now looked much better than before, and Iso immediately retorted, I have always been cool, and this threw Samia off even more. Soon they all burst out laughing together. Thanks to the support of Iso's family, he finally felt truly everything was settled. And after that, he firmly decided enough for today. The next day, Iso fully immersed himself in finishing the rapier. He carved the guard, completed the decorative parts of the hilt. Because the mithril was too difficult to work with, those parts he made from steel, and at the same time secretly engraved a small cat emblem of his workshop on the part hidden under the guard. Eventually, the rapier was ready. As always, Rek immediately began to scrutinize every tiny detail of the new weapon. Now Iso no longer hesitated. He released the rapier outside and then took the finished weapon to Camillo's shop. While they were buying and chatting about the latest news and events across the region, Iso suddenly received another request from the Count himself during the conversation to make a halberd. As Camillo explained, there were currently no large wars or large-scale monster extermination campaigns, but in distant lands minor troubles did not cease. From time to time, clashes with monsters flared up, and smaller conflicts grew here and their quarrels over water rights between lands. During the journey, Diana kept looking around incessantly, as if searching for someone or something. Iso immediately noticed, and said aloud that she had been behaving like that since morning. Later nearby, they spotted a wolf cub and it turned out to be familiar. A few days ago, they had already come across the same one, because at this time of year, wolves often roam the forest. During a recent hunt, they came across a she-wolf with wolf cubs, and since then Diana has behaved the same way, cautiously, constantly scanning the surroundings during travels. Izo quietly noted that wolves in that forest are strangely intelligent, so he even suggested that if they were regularly fed, they could become tame enough for him to keep them as pets. Hearing this, Samia sharply reminded everyone, "This is why you need to be silent next to them." Izo immediately agreed, and only later did they finally get home. And as soon as the car stopped, they immediately noticed someone was waiting in front of the house. It was a woman in a hood. She was clutching something in her arms, and after a moment she knocked on the door. Iso shouted that he was coming and opened the door. As soon as he clearly saw the woman, surprise flashed across his face right before their eyes. Quickly glancing at her appearance, Iso immediately noticed the pointed ears and without hesitation understood. Before him was an elf woman. She politely asked if this was Iso's workshop, and he just as instantly confirmed. Hearing this, the elf sighed with relief and said, "She has a request. She came not just anywhere but specifically for help." Iso calmly replied that such a conversation should not be held just on the street, so he was the first to invite her inside. The elf politely thanked him and entered the workshop. Meanwhile, Reich immediately brought her water. As soon as they settled a little, Iso asked what exactly she needed his help with. Then the elf carefully lifted the object she had been carrying with her all this time. As soon as she removed the wrapping that concealed it, a broken sword made of mithril appeared before them. She said that she wants this weapon to be repaired. Iso, examining the sword, quietly realized what the problem was. Although the blade seemed thin, he immediately understood. This was once a real longsword. Then Iso asked the elf how far she wanted to go with the restoration. She replied that she dreamed of seeing the sword fully restored to its original appearance, and if that proved impossible, she would agree to any repair Iso could make. Next, Iso inquired whether she had traveled there alone, and the elf confirmed. She came alone. She explained that on the way she used a concealment spell so she wouldn't be noticed, then awkwardly asked if that would be a problem, and Iso was a bit surprised by this. However, he answered calmly. Since she got there by herself, he didn't care by what means exactly. And so, when it was announced that Iso officially accepted the request, the elf immediately raised her voice in surprise and asked if he really meant that. As soon as she realized how loudly she had spoken, she immediately apologized. Iso reassured her, no problem. Then he asked if there was a specific deadline for the repair. The elf replied that it would be better to do it sooner, but if everything went well, she hoped to manage it in about 2 weeks. Iso quietly nodded, understood. As soon as she heard this, her face immediately lit up with joy. Later, returning from hunting, Samia and Diana immediately felt there was a guest in the workshop. As soon as Samia looked at the woman, she immediately realized an elf was standing before her. Iso explained that the elf came to ask to repair the sword. After that, the elf woman politely introduced herself and said that her name was Liddy. Diana also introduced herself and explained that she currently lives in Iso's workshop. She sincerely said that she was pleased to meet Liddy. For now, Samia was still a bit irritated, so she quickly introduced herself as well. Reich pronounced her name and added, "She is an apprentice working under Iso's supervision in the workshop." Then Iso added that all 3 of them were like family to her. Hearing this, Liddy cautiously said she had one more request: she wanted to watch every day while Iso repaired the sword. Iso, still trying to explain herself further, quickly realized that this meant one thing: the weapon had to be extremely important to her, so he said he had absolutely nothing against it. Liddy immediately sighed with relief and sincerely thanked him. But Liddy asked another thing. Since she would have to stay nearby during the repair, would Iso allow her to settle temporarily in a small corner of the garden? She cautiously inquired if that would be all right, and Iso instantly noted that dangerous beasts constantly roamed around. Liddy calmly laid everything out. The beasts were unlikely to come close to the area around the workshop. According to her, the magical power enveloping the house was extremely dense. Iso was immediately taken aback with surprise, while Liddy added, the Black Forest itself had much more magical power than most places in the world, and around Iso's workshop it was especially dense, so, as she said, no trees grew near the house. Even ordinary beasts avoided them. In fact, Lydia initially thought that Iso deliberately chose this place, claiming he knew everything in advance. She even admitted that because of this she was impressed by him. But Iso honestly replied, he actually knew nothing about it. The lady said she had seen the mithril rapier forged by Izo before, and when she saw it again, she was convinced. Izo knows how to weave magical power cleanly and naturally directly into the materials themselves. For her, this probably explained why such a dense, magical energy had gathered around the workshop. Iso heard this and waved his hand indifferently, stating that it was simply the craftsman's instinct and he would never admit that in reality everything revolved around the cheap powers he had gained by coming from another world. As soon as he heard Lydia's explanation, something finally clicked in him. He understood something important about the magical power itself, putting together everything she had said. Iso began to understand why it was never possible to forge weapons in the city the way it was done here. The magical power around was too weak, and did not truly saturate the materials in the same way that worked here even without his knowledge, and this logic seemed flawless to him. Eventually, Iso decided to temporarily set aside this topic, and resolutely declared that Liddy would not be allowed to sleep just in the forest, so instead, he offered her a guest room in the workshop. But suddenly Lydia asked, could this really satisfy the three wives of Iso? As soon as she said this, Iso and those three women froze in astonishment at once. Iso quickly explained that they were his family but not his wives at all, and then sharply insisted again, do not hesitate and stay there. Lydia, hearing this, gratefully accepted the offer and said she would gladly take advantage of it, while Iso quietly reminded himself that similar misunderstandings had happened before. Well, for now, Diana asked excitedly if they would really live together with the elf now, and Iso calmly corrected her and explained that it was more like supervision, not something else. But still, Iso admitted he was not too concerned about it. So first he just had dinner with everyone and let himself rest that night, and only then asked Samia what they managed to catch during today's hunt. And she answered, leaf birds. Just hearing this, Iso immediately ordered Diana and Reiku to prepare the guest room, while he himself, together with Samia, began plucking 5 birds they had brought. Meanwhile, Iso quietly pondered something else entirely. Do elves really eat meat at all? Just then, Lady approached closer and she asked if she could also help with the preparations, explaining that in her native village she always did exactly this kind of work. This immediately stunned Samia. She had believed all her life that elves survive only on fruits. In fact, Iso himself felt this way, but Lydia laid everything out clearly. Almost everyone thinks this about elves. As soon as they leave their forests, they mostly turn to vegetables. Hearing this, Iso realized such an image of elves probably exists worldwide, although he still noticed that elves clearly ate meat too. Lydia did not hesitate for a moment. She immediately confirmed, and added that in their forests they often hunted birds and deer. She added, elves usually ate more vegetables, especially the potatoes that grew in their fields. Meat was much less common and came much more irregularly. Hearing this, Iso quietly understood. Forests like the Black Forest were probably unusual, at least because of how much game lived there. Then Iso handed Lydia one of the birds and said he sincerely appreciated her help. Lydia nodded instantly. From then on, they officially began repairing the broken sword that Lydia had brought with her. The first step was to put all the broken pieces together, like assembling a puzzle. If this sword were made of ordinary steel, during hardening the metal's structure could have malfunctioned, and after joining the fragments it would have been extremely difficult to restore its former strength and flexibility, but this blade was forged from mithril, so they didn't have to worry about such problems at all. Carefully gripping the broken mithril sword in his hands, Iso quietly admitted, putting all these fragments back together would not be easy. Yet he immediately decided they needed to start right now. During all this, Lydia suddenly asked Iso if he could even use magic himself. Iso casually replied that no matter what he claimed and supposedly knew magic, in reality he was only capable of igniting a few small flames and summoning weak gusts of wind. When Lydia heard this, a trace of surprise involuntarily slipped out. With surprise, she noted, even to control that much magic usually requires proper training, and she was very impressed that someone like Iso knew so little about his own magical power. Iso immediately realized as soon as he said this, Lydia's smile became a little more threatening. In fact, his magic was only a fragment of cheat-like abilities that manifested instantly as soon as he arrived in this world. He had never truly studied or trained in magic. At the same time, he understood something else. Samia, Reik, and Diana also knew almost nothing about magic. Soon Iso began heating the broken mithril fragment. While Reik carefully assisted him, they worked as a pair. Iso's instructor carefully and precisely strike the parts against each other so that their mating surfaces properly align again. Unlike steel, mithril did not require borax or similar substances to bond firmly. Iso already understood everything. Connecting the fragments in this way is technically possible, But in the part that liked to be tricky, the body's inner whisper continuously murmured temperature control and skillful hammer handling in this process are incredibly important. And soon ISO noticed something troubling. The temperature had already begun to deviate from that ideal threshold needed for the repair. ISO struggled with restoring the broken mithril sword, and the task turned out to be incredibly difficult. Nearby, Liddy carefully watched the work, and anxiety was unmistakably frozen on her face. Eventually, she turned to ISO and asked if he really believed he could manage the repair. ISO honestly admitted it would be hard. Yet he still held on to his faith the sword can be restored and warned Liddy that the entire process would take a lot of time. The lady quietly accepted the answer and whispered that she understood. Deep down, ISO wanted to finish as soon as possible, but at the same time he was stuck on one thought. If he pushed even a little too hard, the fragile balance inside the blade would crumble in an instant. So he proceeded carefully no matter how much time it took. Watching his work, Liddy suddenly asked ISO if he really saw the flow of magical power in the sword. The words struck him straight in the heart unexpectedly, and he asked if that was really what she saw. Liddy explained, his precise strikes with the blade prevented the flow of magical power from breaking apart. That was why she believed he felt it. ISO tried to convey his own understanding in words. He was only trying not to let the shining grains and particles he saw scatter during this. As soon as he finished, Liddy exclaimed excitedly that that was exactly it, and ISO blushed because her face suddenly was too close. Realizing this, she quickly apologized and stepped back, then calmly said that what ISO was talking about was the magical power itself. Then Lady summarized, as expected, ISO truly feels magical power from nature, just hadn't noticed it before because didn't know what it was. ISO quietly admitted her explanation makes sense. At that moment, ISO finally understood something truly important, that strange thing he had always vaguely seen in this. It turned out all this at the same time was magical power. He noticed a few more strange things. The materials seemed to have an internal structural imbalance, and he silently wondered if it was directly related to the magical power itself. Lydia finally said that one of her questions about ISO got an answer, and it somewhat eased his heart. ISO admitted he is glad to hear it. Later, ISO carefully took the mithril sword in his hands and he looked closely at the repaired sections. From the outside, the fragments fit perfectly, but as soon as he looked deeper, saw something else. Particles of light streamed along the blade as if they couldn't be gathered in time. The magic broke off exactly where the fragments met. Even when the sword blade was polished to a shine, its magic still remained torn at the joints. ISO realized, if you just patch up the form and keep chopping with this sword in such a state, sooner or later it will lead to serious problems. At the same time, he felt something else. This sword had already been used so intensively that it shattered into fragments. Therefore, now it must become strong enough to withstand such a load once again. After this, ISO called Liddy closer and showed. He pointed to the exact part of the sword and said without any doubt, he sees absolutely clearly it is right here that the magical power breaks off. After this, he returned to Reich and asked if she saw the same thing. Reich hesitated, then honestly admitted. She only felt it vaguely, and ISO immediately understood. Ordinary people are probably almost incapable of perceiving magical power. Then ISO turned to Liddy. Wouldn't it be dangerous to leave the sword in such a condition? Liddy answered without hesitation, yes, it will create a problem. ISO explained, if this is only a matter of technique, the fragments can be joined and the sword returned to its original form. But there was one more way. If they reforged the sword completely, they could permanently remove the interruption in the flow of magical power. He also clarified, by reforging the sword, he would be able to reproduce its original appearance as accurately as possible. As soon as he finished telling, ISO looked at Liddy and asked what she wanted to do. The lady froze for a moment, carefully weighing her decision until finally she dared and chose recasting. But still, ISO warned one last time. As soon as the sword is reforged, it cannot be returned to its exact original state, so is she really okay with that? Lady calmly replied that everything is fine. She firmly ordered ISO to reforge the sword for her. The most important thing was to restore it so that it could be used again as before. ISO quietly whispered to Liddy that he understands her decision and asked, let her take care of everything else and only this will remain for him. When everyone agreed and everything was settled, they resumed the repairs and ISO paused for a moment, gathered his thoughts and prepared himself mentally. He was suddenly struck by the realization now he must create a thing worthy of Liddy's very resolve. Any little thing wrong and the good name of his workshop would be shadowed. To restore the sword from the very beginning, without a single mistake, ISO first made a wooden mold from the collected fragments. This way he could reproduce the original shape of the weapon as accurately as possible. The molten mithril was hammered flat with a hammer. The fragments were layered one on top of another, tightly tied with a rope. then heated again and beaten relentlessly until they slowly fused into a single whole. New pieces of mithril were layered, carefully forged together, folded back and forged again. This went on endlessly. The day was ending, but the restoration work still stood still. The next day the workshop was raised again without any pauses. The work resumed immediately. While Samia and Diana went nearby to gather fruits together, Iso held the sword and suddenly noticed something wrong, as if it had become harder than it was before. He became curious, so he called Liddy and asked if the magic in the sword had strengthened, because even working with the metal was now much harder. Lydia carefully examined the sword and, convinced that the magical power had indeed increased, praised Iso how he wove magic into the weapon was incredibly skillful. Hearing this, Iso quietly pondered. Could it be that mithril naturally becomes harder the more magic it contains? Earlier, when he forged the rapier, he hadn't noticed this so clearly, so he concluded. The reason lies in the purity of the mithril itself. But still, he decided to continue despite everything. Although Iso hadn't consciously noticed it before, now it became obvious. Every strike of his hammer charged the mithril with magic. After each strike, particles of magical energy became increasingly numerous and settled more evenly inside the metal. And the mithril slowly but inevitably hardened and densified. Sweat slowly trickled down Izo's face, and he quietly admitted this was truly exhausting work. So eventually Izo decided it was time to stop working for today. What he saw hinted that stretching the reforged mithril back into shape would take much longer than he had hoped. And just then Samia suddenly called him from outside. She said that while returning from gathering fruits, their bag had caught on a branch and torn, and everything they had collected spilled around. Then she asked Iso to come and help gather everything back, and he agreed without hesitation. Before stepping out of the workshop, Iso asked Reich for permission to start cleaning everything possible, everything that remained inside. Reich nodded without hesitation and immediately gave his consent. Outside, Samia led them along, explaining that the place was just around the corner. Eventually they reached where Diana was already waiting, and as soon as they approached, Diana quietly asked everyone to be silent, and Iso stared confusedly at their behavior. Carefully approaching closer, Sumia pulled out some draw. She pulled dried meat from her pocket and tossed it nearby. After a few moments, 2 wolf cubs cautiously peeked out from the bushes. As soon as Diana saw them, her face immediately brightened with surprise because they were wolf cubs. Watching the little wolf cubs up close, Iso quietly admitted that their ears, tails, and eyes really made them incredibly cute. Diana immediately agreed with him. Later, they returned home, but as soon as Iso stepped over the threshold, he immediately felt something was wrong. Next to Reich and Liddy, he vividly saw how the stream of magical energy flows and pulses. Reich told that while they waited, Lydia taught her to feel the flow of magical power. She admitted that she still wasn't very good at feeling magical energy, and Lydia explained. Gnomes by nature sense the state of ores and materials better than the magical power itself, so while she was here it was a great opportunity to properly teach Reich. And at the end, she asked Iso if he agreed to such an arrangement. Iso immediately responded, that would be simply wonderful. Somewhere deep in his soul, Iso knew. He himself essentially relied only on his cheating ability, so he could not truly teach Reich magic. But for her, it was a chance worth preserving. If studying magic one day allows Reich to create even better weapons and tools, then later she could return to the family workshop with pride. Later, Iso suddenly remembered something extremely important. He quietly examined the materials, checking every detail, and confirmed both the size and the placement were correct. Then Iso began crafting something from wood. At the end, he carefully placed salt and water nearby as a sign that the work was indeed completed. After that, he made a tiny house nearby, a simple Shinto shrine. Iso considered it rough, unclear, and almost clumsy in appearance. But even so, without this thing in the workshop, he strangely felt uneasy. Meanwhile, Iso quietly and dreamily thought, what will the gods of this world say when something from another appears here? He still hoped they would forgive him. Later, as soon as they woke up, 4 women went outside and saw the sun was shining outside. They immediately agreed this was probably a wonderful day to wash the laundry. Meanwhile, Samia noticed how Iso was secretly doing something in the room. Interested, the others approached closer to take a look as well. Then Wright asked Iso what exactly he was doing. Iso replied that it was a ritual passed down from the north to pray to the god. Diana pointed her finger at that tiny, strange little house and asked if that was what he meant. Iso confirmed and explained. It was something like a miniature temple placed in every home. Reich inquired whether such customs were common in the north at all, and Iso honestly admitted. Maybe it was just a family tradition, he was not even sure if it really worked. Samia could not resist and immediately asked if they could join as well. Liddy was also interested and politely asked if she could join, to which Iso replied that of course she could. Soon all five sincerely and together entered the ritual. Izo was still not sure whether the god, about whom it was supposedly whispered that he lived in this shrine, existed at all. But despite the doubts, everyone silently bowed their heads and prayed alongside them. And so another usual routine quietly wove itself into their days quietly, mundanely, without unnecessary words. When everything was over, Iso announced, "Breakfast is ready." Praying before the shrine, where the presence of the deity gave no guarantees, he fervently hoped. Today's work would pass without misfortune and the hunt would finally succeed. He dreamed that the food would be truly delicious, and his family would continue to spend days together laughing as always. ISO announced that the work was not yet finished. Wright dived into the task with ordinary model knives, while Samia and Diana nearby took up casting and wood carving. Work on the mythical scroll continued relentlessly. Step by step they shaped the metal, each time bringing it closer to its original form. Working with mithril required complete concentration for ISO. It was almost like running at full speed on a thin rope high in the air. Just a slight misstrike during forging, and the magical power in the metal instantly crumbles and disappears. That is why working with mithril became a real challenge for ordinary blacksmiths. They did not understand the magical power and stubbornly believed that without it nothing could be moved here. And one who truly knew how to control magic would more likely become a mage than devote himself to blacksmithing. So it is no wonder that in the world only a few truly knew how to work with mithril. Even despite exhaustion, Iso still believed it was worth it, for the sake of that beautiful sound born from the hammer strikes. Later, during a break, Iso asked Lydia if she really enjoyed sitting here and watching them work every day. Lydia honestly admitted, under normal circumstances she probably would have been bored a long time ago, but Iso's work was not ordinary at all, so watching her never bored her. And then Lydia involuntarily added one more thing. Elves live extraordinarily long, so time passes differently for them. Days often seem much shorter to them than to humans. And these words clearly shocked the other three women. Meanwhile, Iso quietly began to wonder, maybe Samia is actually younger than she seems. And at the same time he thought, could it be that she perceives time as if it lasts much longer for her? The lady added that even the sound itself was amazingly beautiful. In the entire elven village, you won't find a forge that sounds as pleasant as Iso's workshop. Filled with curiosity, Iso asked, does the sound of forging change depending on who is working with the metal? Lydia nodded and convincingly confirmed, yes, indeed. The more skillfully magical power was woven into the mithril, the more beautiful the sound became. And the purer the mithril was, the easier it was to work with it properly. These praises naturally encouraged Iso, and the mithril became harder each time magical power was poured into it, so every new improvement required even more time and effort. Iso knew this well. Too long a concentration on the same thing harms both body and mind. Therefore, in Iso's workshop, everyone made sure that on weekends and holidays everyone rested properly, and recharged. This is how they kept their fighting spirit high. Then Iso rushed to the river to fetch water. On the way he quietly thought. Finally, for the first time in a long time, he had a good sleep, and now, thanks to this full sleep, he felt energetic again. But just as Iso was walking through the forest, he suddenly froze. Someone was nearby and he immediately felt it. And there, just in front of the tree, stood Liddy with her eyes closed. In a moment, Liddy slowly opened her eyes and looked at Iso. Iso quietly greeted her, "Good morning," and immediately added that it is usually dangerous for someone to be outside alone. At least that's how it usually is. The lady calmly agreed and then immediately explained. With such dense magical power, ordinary beasts do not come close, but places where magic is in excess often attract monsters. Iso asked Liddy if monsters could suddenly appear here because of the accumulation of magical energy around. Liddy answered just as calmly that this happens rarely. She said, even when those who lived in the forest eventually turned into monsters, their true nature usually did not change. Sometimes they became much more aggressive than ever before, so she warned. Caves where magical forces stagnate strongly must be approached with maximum caution. Hearing this, Iso froze for a moment in silence. That bear he met earlier probably belonged to the same kind. So Iso asked if it would be better not to keep animals in this area, and Liddy immediately nodded. Yes, it is really dangerous here. So if someone was not fully ready to handle an emergency situation on their own, it was better to avoid it. Iso immediately understood where this was leading. Everyone who keeps local animals there must be ready to take responsibility if something goes wrong. Then Iso turned to Liddy and asked what exactly she used to do in the forest. And yet he quickly clarified. If the conversation became too delicate, she might simply ignore the question. The lady answered without any hesitation that there were no secrets here. She was only absorbing magical power, and this thought slightly embarrassed Iso, so he asked what exactly she meant. After that, the lady explained, elves, besides ordinary food, also need magical power for a full life. As soon as he heard this, Iso finally had a realization. This was why elves were so rarely seen in cities where magical power was weak. After he told Liddy that he would return first, Iso quietly admitted to himself he finally understood everything, because before he had no idea about this. But just as he was about to leave, the women suddenly called him back at the last moment. She asked if he really no longer intended to ask her any questions. Iso calmly replied, there are many things in life better left unasked, and he himself knew this well. Having said this, he quietly stepped aside. Later in the workshop, Iso explained to Reiku, only stretching the mithril into the required shape remained. By the holiday, he had already managed to restore the reforged mithril to its original length. So, using the previously made form as a reference, step by step he carefully restored the sword's initial appearance. Meanwhile, Iso finally reached the final stage of the process. While working, I cautiously asked Lita if she minded answering one of my questions. I was incredibly eager to find out how her mithril sword shattered into so many fragments. Liddy caught her breath for a moment, and only then did she dare to answer. Iso explained why he asked. In a quiet voice, he said that the mithril sword, broken into countless fragments, was supposed to withstand something truly extraordinary. And if he understood exactly what situation caused it, then perhaps he could make a version that would endure something similar next time. Having listened to him, Liddy cautiously said. She could not reveal many details because the matter concerned magic. Yet she added, if one goes through special procedures, a weapon made of mithril can be turned into a conduit of magic by extracting hidden magical powers from it. Liddy said that her sword had long been kept in the village precisely for this, until an incident occurred when it had to be used beyond its usual limits. But as soon as it was pushed too far, it suddenly shattered into pieces. Iso heard this and immediately understood everything. Liddy really needed a skilled blacksmith to restore the weapon and properly refill it with magic. Organizing everything clearly in his mind, Iso quietly thanked her for agreeing to tell him. As the 2-week deadline relentlessly approached, Iso did not stop forging the mithril sword, carefully applying the final touches, gradually refining every detail. Just a little more and the sword was already ready. Iso quietly whispered to Liddy that the work was finished, and invited her to see the weapon with her own eyes. The lady looked closely at the restored sword, and 3 women nearby held their breath, waiting for what she would say. In a moment, Liddy smiled. She immediately thanked Iso and admitted that the finished sword turned out to be even better than she had hoped. As soon as these words escaped her lips, 3 women together burst out with an admiring exclamation, but it was the very phrase, better than expected, that actually embarrassed Iso. Somewhere deep in his soul, he quietly asked himself, had he overdone it by reforging it? And if so, maybe this result could really be called a true success. Liddy smiled warmly in response, then continued. According to her, not only was the shape of the sword perfectly restored now, it had significantly more magical power than before. And this improvement would truly help exactly in what the sword was intended for. Hearing this, Iso finally exhaled with deep relief. Liddy raised the question of payment and explained that, although they initially agreed only verbally, she still wanted to make sure whether such a resolution really suited them. Then she revealed what she had been clutching in her hand until now. They sewed 5 shiny gold coins, and nearby lay a flat plate resembling a precious stone. Liddy said that a weapon with such magical power would usually cost much more, but honestly admitted this was really the last amount they could pay. Hearing this, Iso barely shook his head. Liddy herself had provided the original materials, so he sincerely believed the payment was already too large, and then, after thinking a little, Iso handed Liddy one of the gold coins. Instead, he offered an exchange. Would she give him vegetable seeds from her village for this 1 gold coin, of course, if it would not be too great a burden for the village? Then she could simply pass the seeds to Camillo in the city. Liddy objected that she had already lived there and used their hospitality during her visit, and Iso replied. She had also spent time teaching Reich various things about magical power, so he considered this seed payment rather as payment for the lesson. Having heard this, the lady quietly smiled and said that she would then gladly accept his proposal. Later, near the workshop, the lady sincerely thanked everyone once again for all the help they had given her, confessing that during her stay she had experienced many exciting things. They created amazing things there and truly enjoyed every moment. With enthusiasm, Diana addressed Liddy. Next time you come, teach her elven fencing as well. And Reich meanwhile announced that before Liddy returns, she herself will first thoroughly train in wielding magical power. Before finally leaving, Liddy added, later she wants to entrust the Iso workshop not only with repairs but also with many other tasks. Iso calmly replied that when the time comes, she will definitely do it.